Chapter 119. There was a group of people standing outside the garrison. The servants beside the carriages were unloading boxes from the carriages and were extremely busy. The guests were sitting and drinking tea in the resting area outside the garrison. As soon as Xiaoju entered, she saw Yang Ping pouring tea for the guests. Fourth young master Chu. The first to greet him was Lin Shuanghe. He waved his fan and walked forward as if he were a host greeting a guest. Is the tea to your liking? Chu Xilan stood up and cupped his hands in greeting to Lin Shuanghe and Xiaoju. Military Governor Xiao, young Master Lin. He smiled and said, the Liang Province garrison's Yunwu tea is mellow and elegant, leaving a lingering fragrance on the teeth and cheeks. Governor, you are so lucky. Xiaoju pulled over a chair and sat down. She stared at him and said, it's just some coarse tea, no need to be so polite. Chu Xilan was not angry. He only smiled and said, Governor, you are joking. The fourth young master of Shi Jinbo's household was about the same age as Xiaoju. Compared to Xiaoju's usual indifferent and lazy expression, he appeared much gentler. He was also very good-looking. His facial features were delicate, his skin was fair, and he wore a loose jade-colored robe. He appeared even thinner than before. His eyes were long and narrow, and he always had a smile on his face. He was truly an elegant gentleman, as gentle as jade. The two of them stood together. One was as cold as autumn water, the other as bright and clear as an orchid. It was a very pleasing sight to behold. Beside Chu Xiao stood a girl who looked like a maidservant. Although she was wearing the clothes of a maidservant, she was exceptionally beautiful. Her facial features were deep and bright. Even though she was wearing plain clothes, it was difficult to conceal her beauty. Lin Shuanghe was used to seeing beautiful women, but when he saw this girl's appearance, he couldn't help but be dazzled. He sighed inwardly. When master and servant stood together, they did not look like people of the mortal world. Of Shi Jinbo's 4 sons, the first 3 had average looks. Only this one looked so beautiful. It seemed that a mother's appearance was very important. Fourth young master Chu, why have you come to the Liang State Guard? Xiaoju asked. Chu Xiao laughed and said, His Majesty heard that military governor Xiao has annihilated tens of thousands of enemy troops in the Liangzhou Guard and eradicated the remaining evildoers of the Chang tribe. His Majesty's dragon countenance was greatly pleased and specially sent me to deliver the reward, while at the same time, he wanted to see the morale of the Liangzhou Guard. Reward? Xiaoju looked at him playfully and said carelessly, Liangzhou is a cold and bitter place. For fourth young master Chu to lower himself to come and watch, he smiled, it's not simple. Chu Xiao said, it is Xilan's fortune to be able to see the mighty army led by military governor Xiao with her own eyes. Xiaoju laughed but didn't say anything. His Majesty also ordered me to hold a banquet to celebrate our victory in Liang Province. Chu Xiao said, however, I am not clear on how the Liang Province Guard normally celebrates. Therefore, I can only trouble the commander-in-chief. The new recruits who died in battle have just been buried, Xiaoju said, I'm afraid it's not very appropriate to celebrate now. Chu Xiao's smile was gentle, but his tone was firm, how can there not be blood in war? Besides, annihilating the enemy is a joyous occasion. Rewards should be rewarded. This is also His Majesty's intention. Was he using the Emperor Wenxuan's name? Xiaoju stared at him for a while. After a while, he nodded and smiled, all right. He stood up and said meaningfully, we can hold a celebration banquet tomorrow. Fourth young master Chu, please come and join us. Chu Xiao stood up and returned the salute, deference is no substitute for obedience. Xiaoju left the room and ordered Fei Nu, arrange a room for fourth young master Chu's people. Fei Nu accepted the order and left. Lin Shuanghe followed him out and moved closer to him. He asked in a low voice, what did Chu Xiao come here for? From the looks of it, is he going to stay in the Liang Province Guard for a while? Su Jingfu is anxious now that he's gone, Xiao Zhu said calmly. He sent his dog over to take a look. Is there a problem? Lin Shuanghe looked back at the room and saw Chu Zhao drinking tea with his head lowered. He asked, isn't it a bit unsafe for him to stay here? After all, this guy is Su Jingfu's man. Unsafe? Xiao Zhu said, that depends on his ability. Let's go. Where are we going? Since it's a reward, we should see what's inside. Xiao Zhu said playfully. He came to the Liang province guard with such great fanfare. It's just a few boxes of rewards. Isn't that a bit unreasonable? You want to take advantage of this opportunity again? Xiao Zhu glanced at him. Lin Shuanghe said, I don't mean anything else. I'm just asking. Don't be angry. Let's go see the treasures. He Yan returned from the martial arts practice field and returned to his idle state. He lay on the bed and read a few travel books while waiting for Song Tao Tao to bring him food. After eating, Song Tao Tao was about to leave when he heard some movement outside the door. It seemed that Song Tao Tao was talking to someone. He thought that Xiao Zhu had returned, so he got off the bed and opened the door. He saw Lin Shuanghe immediately. Dr. Lin. He Yan looked around but didn't see Xiao Zhu. He asked, is the commander-in-chief not here? He went to discuss the celebration banquet with the instructor. Lin Shuanghe smiled. I'll wait for him in the room. I have something to tell him. Celebration banquet? He Yan was confused. What celebration banquet? The Liang province guard's celebration banquet. Lin Shuanghe waved at Song Tao Tao. After Song Tao Tao left, he walked towards He Yan. However, when he reached the door, he suddenly stopped and didn't want to go any further. He Yan was confused. What's wrong? Lin Shuanghe retracted his hand and said seriously, it's not good for a man and a woman to be in the same room. If word gets out, it will damage your reputation. He Yan was speechless. She said, no one knows my identity here. Dr. Lin, you can just treat me as a normal recruit. Also, didn't you come here before? Lin Shuanghe waved his hand reservedly. There were other people in the room before. Now it's just the two of us. I'm afraid that it will cause a misunderstanding. What misunderstanding? He Yan was helpless. I often stay in the same room as the commander-in-chief. There's nothing wrong with it. Lin Shuanghe took a step back. That's even more unacceptable. I can't play with my friend's wife. Do you think I'm a despicable person who would betray my friend? He Yan was speechless. What kind of nonsense was this person spouting? She thought for a moment and finally came up with a good idea. How about this, young Master Lin? You go to the commander-in-chief's room, and I'll stay in my room. I'll open the middle door and we'll talk through it. This way, we won't be in the same room, but in two separate rooms. How does this work? Lin Shuanghe didn't expect He Yan to be able to do this. After a moment of surprise, he slapped his fan. Let's do it this way. He Yan returned to his room and used Cheng Lisu's silver thread to pry open the lock. He struggled to push a stool to the other side of the middle door. Lin Shuanghe was already waiting there. He looked at the middle door and asked He Yan, do you usually play like this? How? Well. Lin Shuanghe seemed to feel embarrassed when he said this. He shook his head and smiled. I didn't expect Huijin to be like this as well. He Yan was confused by his words, but he still remembered what he said about the celebratory feast. He asked, Dr. Lin, what's the celebratory feast you mentioned earlier? Didn't you defeat Raidamuzi's people and wipe out tens of thousands of enemy troops? Lin Shuanghe said. When His Majesty heard about this, he was very happy. He specially sent people to bring rewards to commend you. He also wants to hold a celebratory feast at the Liang Prefecture Guard to reward the 3 armies. He Yan was stunned when he heard this. Now. It's not very good to celebrate now. It wasn't a good time to celebrate in the Liang Prefecture Guard. Although they won this battle, they came in a hurry. At the beginning, they didn't know what was going on, so dozens of sentries died. Even though they won in the end, it was mostly because of the support of the South Mansion soldiers. Compared to the joy of winning the battle, the feelings of these new soldiers right now were probably more of sadness and fear of the death of their comrades. How could it be good to celebrate at this time? What can we do about His Majesty's intentions? Lin Shuanghe sighed. How can we not appreciate his kindness? For a moment, neither of them spoke. After a while, He Yen asked, the person who came to deliver His Majesty's decree is the one you were talking about today, Chu Xilan, right? He Yen asked, who is Chu Xilan? You've never heard of Chu Xilan? This time, Lin Shuanghe was surprised. He Yen shook his head. Xiao Rubi is the #1 dream man in the capital, Xiao Huijin is #2, and Chu Xilan is #3. Lin Shuanghe sighed. However, ever since Xiao Rubi got married, there's only Xiao Huijin and Chu Xilan. Our Huijin has a cold personality and doesn't like to talk to girls. In the past few years, he's not as good as Chu Xilan. Although Chu Xilan's background is a bit low, he's good-looking and gentle. He's not even engaged yet. If you ask the girls in the capital who they want to marry, they'll probably say Chu Xilan. What? He looked at He Yen. You've never heard of him when you were in the capital? That's impossible. Of course, He Yen didn't know. Previously, she had been leading troops into battle. How could she have the time to pay attention to the affairs of the heart or the handsome men in the capital? Later, she returned to the capital and quickly got married. She had no way of knowing about other men. Chu Xilan really hadn't heard of him. I've been raised in the boudoir by my father since I was young. I never left the house and rarely even spoke to other men, He Yen said seriously. I really don't know anything about the outside world. Is that so? Lin Shuanghe said. Then your father is really strict with you. He Yen nodded. That's true. She asked, what's the relationship between Chu Xilan and military governor Xiao? Xiao Ju wasn't close to people. She hadn't seen him like anyone, but she hadn't seen him hate anyone either. Su Jingfu was one of them. She hadn't seen Chu Xilan today, but just hearing his name made Xiao Ju unhappy. Could it be that they had a grudge in the past? That's a long story. Lin Shuanghe stood up and poured himself a cup of tea. He drank the tea to moisten his throat before sitting down again. He said to He Yen, you haven't heard of Chu Xilan, but have you heard of his father, Shi Jinbo, Chu Linfeng? He Yen felt that the name sounded familiar. She thought for a moment and said, is he the one who married 19 concubines, each of them outstanding beauties? Yes. He Yen remembered the name Chu Linfeng. When she was in the army, the deputy generals and subordinates would gather together to chat. They didn't envy the emperor, but they envied Shi Jinbo the most. Shi Jinbo was born handsome and was famous for being a handsome man in Dawei. His wife was a few years older than him. She was ugly and had a fierce temperament. A wastrel like Chu Linfeng wouldn't give up so easily. Before they were married, he spent every day in the flower shop. After they were married, he became even more serious. The wife he married was virtuous. She seemed to know that she was ordinary and wasn't favored by her husband, so she never stopped him from taking in concubines. Over the years, he took in 19 concubines. Each of them was beautiful, charming, and had their own interests. But taking in concubines was one thing. Over the years, other than the 3 young masters who crawled out of his wife's womb, no concubine was able to give birth to Shi Jinbo's children. It was said that these concubines were all fed sterile drugs before they entered the Chu family. No matter how favored they were, if they didn't have children, they could only curry favor with the master or the mistress. Shi Jinbo's wife had a tight control over these concubines. No one dared to cause trouble under her watch. Shi Jinbo continued to be lovey-dovey with his concubines every day. Shi Jinbo's wife only pretended not to see and raised her 3 sons. Chu Xilan was Shi Jinbo's fourth son, but he wasn't born of Shi Jinbo's wife. Is he a concubine's illegitimate son? He Yan asked. No, no, Lin Shuanghe said. Madame Chu is even stricter with her concubines than your father is with you. How could a concubine give birth to a son? Then, I don't know what exactly happened either. In short, one day, during the Chu family's banquet, there was an additional 4-year-old son named Chu Zhao. Lin Shuanghe took another sip of tea. Although it wasn't said, everyone knew that Chu Zhao was most likely Chu Linfeng's illegitimate son. He Yan's eyes widened. Madame Chu was very careful, but she didn't expect Shi Jinbo to have such a trick up his sleeve. The child was already 4 years old and recognized him in front of everyone. What else could happen? Lin Shuanghe spread his hands. If that was the case, Chu Xilan would only be Chu Xilan's illegitimate son. However, when Chu Xilan was 10 years old, he was registered under Madame Chu's name. Therefore, his current status is the fourth son of Shi Jinbo's official wife. Do you know why? Why? Because he was the favorite student of the current Prime Minister, Su Jingfu. He Yan was stunned. Su Jingfu again. Although Shi Jinbo was dissolute, he wasn't a kind father. I think Chu Xilan didn't have a good life under Madame Chu. I don't know how he was able to live until he was 10 years old, and then he hooked up with Su Jingfu. How could Shi Jinbo not give Prime Minister Su face? Later, he registered Chu Zhao under Madame Chu's name. It was probably Su Jingfu's idea. Then this fourth young Master Chu is very powerful. Lin Shuanghe looked at He Yan. Do you think he's very powerful? Very powerful. As you said, he didn't have any external help in the residence. His father didn't love him, and his mother wasn't by his side. Now that he's the official wife's young master, he was able to get His Majesty to send him to the Yangzhou guards to deliver the imperial edict. It's very powerful that he was able to reach this step on his own. If he wasn't powerful, how could he have become Su Jingfu's favorite student? Lin Shuanghe shook his head and sighed. Then what about his mother? He Yan asked. Wasn't she taken into Count Shi Jinbo's residence? I don't know. Lin Shuanghe shook his head. I heard that she died after giving birth to him. If that wasn't the case, with Chu Xilan's current abilities, he should be able to let her live a better life. He Yan nodded thoughtfully. I see. It's a pity that military governor Xiao doesn't like fourth young Master Chu. Xiao Ju and Su Jingfu were enemies, not friends. Chu Xilan was Su Jingfu's student. Naturally, he was also Xiao Ju's enemy. Brother, Lin Shuanghe said, if you had to choose between Huaijin and Chu Xilan, who would you side with? He Yan felt that this question was simply inconceivable. Why do you ask? I'm just curious as to what choice the young lady from Dawei will make. I don't even know Chu Xilan, He Yan said. Of course I'll side with the governor. Lin Shuanghe revealed a meaningful smile. There's no need to speak so early. You'll be able to see Chu Xilan at the celebration banquet tomorrow. He Yan, so what if I see him? What's so special about him? He Yan didn't expect that, just as Lin Shuanghe said, she would see the man of Dawei's dreams the next day. He was the fourth young Master Chu Xilan, who could compete with Xiao Ju. It was rare that it didn't snow that night. The next day, it just so happened to be a sunny day. Although the weather was cold, people felt warm when the sun shone on them. He Yan got out of bed to eat porridge. She felt that the wound on her waist healed faster after being exposed to the sun. The Yangzhou guards were really strange. During the summer, they were so hot that they would cry and scream whenever they saw the sun. During the winter, they would be happy if they could even see half the sun. She couldn't go to the martial arts arena for day training now, but she felt that the sun was very good, so she decided to walk around the courtyard with her staff. She had just reached the door when she heard Song Taotao's voice. I saw this golden pastry roll first. It's mine. Immediately after, a woman's good-natured voice said, "Miss, this pastry roll was specially made by our young master's chef. It didn't come from the Guard Institute's kitchen, so it's not yours. You think it's your young master's just because you say so." The young lady said angrily, "It's all in the kitchen. How would I know if it was made by your chef? Since you have a chef, can't you just make another pastry roll? The process of making golden pastry rolls is troublesome. If we make another pastry roll, we'll miss the young master's meal time. Then don't eat it." Miss He Yen couldn't listen anymore. He walked out and said, "Miss Song." Song Tao Tao turned her head and looked over with the woman who was arguing with her. She said happily, "Big brother He. This is a golden pastry roll. Do you want to try it?" He Yen, the woman also said, "That's the young master's." He Yen took the golden pastry roll and returned it to the woman. He said, "She's just a child who doesn't know any better. Please don't mind her." Big brother He. Song Tao Tao stomped her feet in anger. "Why did you return it to her? It's mine to begin with." He Yen shook his head. She guessed that the young master the woman was talking about was probably the fourth young master of Count Shijin's estate, Chu Xilan. Chu Xilan and Xiao Ju's relationship was so delicate. If he caused any trouble for Xiao Ju because of this, the loss would outweigh the gain. "Thank you, young master." The woman smiled sweetly at He Yen. He Yen was also stunned. For a moment, he was shocked by the young lady's beauty. There were very few young ladies in the Liang Province Guard. Excluding her, who was a fake, there were only Shin Muxue and Song Tao Tao. One was elegant and beautiful, while the other was adorable. Now that there was someone as beautiful as a peony, it was especially eye-catching. Even Chu Xilan's maidservant was this beautiful? He Yen thought to himself. Previously, Lin Shuanghe had mentioned that the Wei women ranked their husbands first. Only an idiot would choose Chu Xilan. If the maidservant he picked was already this beautiful, how could a normal woman catch his eye? He might as well choose Xiao Ju. Xiao Ju was surrounded by men. Perhaps he had seen too many men, and now he saw a woman, so his requirements were much lower and there was still a chance. Seeing He Yen staring at the woman's face without saying anything, Song Tao Tao became even more anxious. She anxiously tugged on He Yen's sleeve and said, "Why are you looking at her? What's there to look at?" The woman holding the golden pastry roll saw this and burst into laughter. Her smile was captivating. "Ing Xiang," someone said. The maidservant named Ing Xiang immediately stopped smiling and bowed. "Fourth young master. Fourth young master. Chu Xilan." He Yen turned around and his gaze fell on the person in front of him. It was a young man wearing a light jade-colored robe with extremely wide sleeves and a jade crown. He looked as noble and pure as an orchid, but also as handsome as a banished immortal. He had a faint smile on his face as he nodded at He Yen. He Yen frowned. This person's appearance was very familiar. When he saw He Yen, he was also startled. After a moment, he smiled as if he had seen through He Yen's thoughts. He stretched out his hand with his palm facing up and said softly, "Little brother, you dropped something." He Yen suddenly came back to his senses. She remembered where she had seen this person before. That day, she was still in Shuajing. For He Yunxing's tuition fee, she had racked her brains and had no choice but to go to Lutong village to gamble. However, she had been chased by the losers. After she had beaten them all, someone suddenly appeared and told her that she had dropped some money. That person's good looks were hard to forget as long as one had seen him. Now that he suddenly saw him here, because it was daytime, He Yen didn't recognize him for a moment. Instead, he recognized He Yen first. "You are fourth young master Chu?" He Yen asked. Chu Xilan nodded. "That's me." He Yen was momentarily speechless. What kind of luck was this? What kind of coincidence was this? Just by casually climbing over a wall at night to fight, she was able to meet the man of Dewey's dreams. This one is Chu Zhao. Chu Xilan looked at He Yan with a smile. Little brother and I can be considered old acquaintances, but I don't know your name. May I know your name? He Yan could somewhat understand why He Yan was able to be on par with Xiao Ju. He hurriedly returned the greeting. You flatter me. This one is He Yan. The Yan in grass and trees, He Yan in clear river and clear sea. Chu Zhao smiled. That's a good name. But... He looked around and asked in confusion, why is brother He here? Me? He Yan said, I am a new recruit of the Liang province guards. However, I was injured a few days ago, so I did not go to the practice field for training. I see. At this time, Song Tao Tao, who had been silent all this time, finally reacted. She carefully pulled on He Yan's hand. Perhaps it was because she saw that Chu Xilan was too handsome, but her aggressive attitude towards Ying Xiang instantly disappeared. She even felt a bit embarrassed. In a low voice, she asked, Brother He, who is this person? Do you know him? This question was difficult to answer. She knew Chu Zhao, but she was not as familiar with him as Song Tao Tao thought. It was just that she had suddenly seen a familiar face in the Liang province guards, so she subconsciously became a bit excited. He Yan said, this is the fourth young master of Count Shi Jin's residence. I met him once when I was in Shuo capital. Chu Zhao smiled. We can be considered old acquaintances. Chapter 120. When He Yan and Chu Xilan were talking, they didn't notice that Xiao Ju and Lin Shuanghe were standing behind a tree not too far away. Lin Shuanghe looked at them and asked curiously, it seems that sister He knows Chu Xilan. When I asked her yesterday, why did she say that she didn't know him? You asked her? Yes, I even asked her, if you and Chu Xilan had a conflict, whose side would she stand on? Lin Shuanghe waved his fan and smiled. Do you want to know how she answered? Xiao Ju, no. Why are you like this? Lin Shuanghe said, let me tell you, sister, he said without thinking that she doesn't know Chu Xilan, so of course she would stand on your side. However, he looked at the two people talking in the distance and said, she clearly knows him, so why did she say that she doesn't know him? Xiao Ju sneered, why would you believe the words of a swindler? Swindler? Lin Shuanghe looked at Xiao Ju, what did she lie to you about? Could it be, he thought of something and pretended to exclaim in a low voice, she and Chu Xilan are in cahoots? Is she also one of Su Jingfu's people? Xiao Ju didn't want to bother with him. As they were talking, the beautiful servant named Ying Xiang turned her head and saw them. She immediately called out from afar, Military Governor Xiao, young Master Lin. There was nowhere to hide now. Lin Shuanghe stood up and nodded reservedly, fourth young Master Chu, brother He. He Yan asked, did you also come out to sunbathe? We just came out for a walk. Lin Shuanghe held his fan and looked at He Yan and Chu Zhao. He asked tentatively, did brother He and fourth young Master Chu know each other? He Yan said, it's just a chance encounter. I only found out that he was fourth young Master Chu after meeting him at the Liang Province Guard Institution. I was also very surprised. What do you mean by that? Let's hear it. Lin Shuanghe was relentless. Chu Zhao stood there with a smile. He had no intention of taking the initiative to explain. Xiao Ju's gaze was also calm, but it made He Yan feel a little cold. Song Tao Tao, on the other hand, was very curious and asked, that's right, that's right. How did you two know each other? That, He Yan could only brace himself and explain, previously, when I was in Shuojing, I went to Lutong village to gamble at night and won a lot of silver. I was chased by people and accidentally met fourth young Master Chu. Fourth young Master Chu found the money I left behind and returned it to me. At that time, I did not know his identity, so I hurriedly thanked him and left. Lutong Villa. Song Tao Tao was shocked. Big brother He, you're gambling. didn't you say that your father is very strict with you and that you don't leave the house? Lin Shuanghe couldn't help but ask. He Yan raised his head and met Xiao Ju's half-smile. He couldn't help but feel his scalp go numb. Taking a step back, he said, at that time, I was forced to make a living. I only went there once. I haven't gone there since. Lin Shuanghe and Xiao Ju both knew that she was a woman. For a woman to go gambling alone at night, it was a bit too shocking. Furthermore, gambling was not a good thing, but to say it in front of this group of important people really made her feel ashamed. I didn't think that brother he would come to the Liang Province Guard Institution, Chu Zhao said with a slight smile. It can be said that you and I are fated. That night, I still remember how strong brother he was when he dealt with those thugs. Are you very strong? Lin Shuanghe asked He Yan. He Yan gave a perfunctory smile. I was just lucky. At tonight's celebratory feast, I must drink a few more cups with brother He, Chu Zhao said. That way, we won't waste our fate. He Yan, thank you, fourth young master Chu. She thought that this Chu Zhao was really too easy to get along with. As the son of Shi Jinbo, and now Su Jingfu's favorite student, no matter what, it was rare for him to be so patient and gentle to a normal recruit like her. Not to mention whether he was good or bad, just based on his ability to conduct himself, there was nothing to say. Ing Xiang, Chu Zhao glanced at Song Tao Tao and said with a smile, give the golden roll to this little girl to eat. I don't need these. Song Tao Tao was overwhelmed by this favor. For me. Yes, he said warmly. If you really like it, I can have the chef make it for you every day. But, young master, Ing Xiang said hesitantly. I brought the chef here especially for you. I'm not particular about what I eat, Chu Zhao said. There's no need to make these every day. Then. Song Tao Tao hesitated for a moment, then looked at him. Thank you, fourth young master Chu. You're welcome. He Yan looked at him and felt that Lin Shuanghe had mentioned yesterday that De Wei was the #1 man in women's dreams. No wonder Chu Xilan had surpassed him. He looked like this, and he was so gentle and considerate to women. He was probably the type that everyone, regardless of age, would like. Ing Xiang handed the plate with the golden roll to Song Tao Tao. Chu Zhao looked at Xiao Ju. Military Governor Xiao, where are you planning to go? The martial arts arena. Xiao Ju smiled. Fourth young master Chu, do you also want to go? There's no need for me to go. Chu Zhao smiled. I'll just go back to my room and read for a while. Lin Shuanghe cupped his hands towards Chu Zhao. Then I'll see you tonight. He then looked at He Yan. Brother He, what are you doing? Me? He Yan didn't dare to stay too long with Chu Zhao. This person was still Su Jingfu's student. Who knew if he was a friend or foe? He said, the weather is good today. I'm planning to take advantage of the sun to walk around the courtyard and recover. That's fine too. Lin Shuanghe instructed. Just don't make too much of a commotion. He Yan nodded. The group then parted ways. Because Chu Zhao lived nearby, He Yan didn't dare to go out casually. Even though she really did want to ask Chu Zhao about the situation in Shuajing. However, looking at the atmosphere between Xiao Ju and Chu Zhao, at least now wasn't a good time to ask. She went to the courtyard and tried to throw away the stick. She walked around for a while and only stopped when she felt tired. Then, she went back to her room to sleep and read. In the blink of an eye, it was already evening. Qing Lisu knocked on the door early in the morning. Big brother. He Yan went to open the door for him. Qing Lisu had changed into a new set of amber robes. The corners of the robes were embroidered with a group of black-tailed koi fish. He was in high spirits and grabbed He Yan's hand. I was afraid that you would be sleeping, so I didn't dare to come early. Look at my new robes. Do you think they look good? He Yan, can I ask you a question? What is it? Why do you have koi fish embroidered on every piece of clothing? When they were in Liangzhou City, Qing Lisu gave her a set of robes with koi fish embroidered on the corners. He Yan had wanted to ask him for a long time. Was there a special meaning behind it? You don't know. Qing Lisu turned around. Speaking of which, my father fell in love with my mother at first sight. However, my mother's family had already taken her place in another family. They disliked my father because he was 2 years younger than my mother. My father bribed the cook in the residence to send the koi fish to my mother's small kitchen. When the cook was butchering the koi fish, he saw the letter inside. My mother was moved by the letter. Later, she persuaded my grandmother to marry my father. Qing Lisu usually didn't remember poetry and literature. However, he remembered it by heart now. He spoke with fervor and assurance. The guest came from afar, leaving me a pair of koi fish. Who, cooked koi fish, and there was a ruler in the book. Kneeling and reading the book, what was in the book? On the top, it said to be longing for each other. On the bottom, it said to be eating more rice. He proudly said, my name came from this book. He Yan was stunned. It's that interesting. That's right. Qing Lisu turned around and showed He Yan the koi embroidery on his body. Later on, my clothes and hairpins were mostly in the shape of a koi fish. After all, the koi fish were my parents' matchmakers. Wearing it is wearing my parents' love for me. At this moment, He Yan was truly envious of Qing Lisu. She said, your parents are so good. Of course. Qing Lisu finished speaking and looked at He Yan. Big brother, aren't you going to wear something else for tonight's celebration? He Yan lowered his head and looked at himself. What's wrong with wearing this? Isn't everyone dressed like this? She was still wearing the uniform of the Liang province guards. Today, she specially wore red for the celebration. But you're the one who defeated Raida Muko. It's too plain to dress like this. I don't have any other clothes, He Yan said. This is good. Let's go. The instructor can't wait. Qing Lisu shrugged and didn't force her. She closed the door for her and the two of them walked to the wilderness at the foot of Baiyue Mountain. Today was the celebration banquet to celebrate the Liang province guard's victory over Raida Muzi's rebel army. There was no snow tonight, but it was colder than usual. A bonfire burned in the wilderness. The recruits sat on the ground and drank wine and ate meat. Although they were drinking wine and eating meat, compared to the previous Mid-Autumn festival, it was much more desolate. After all, they had just lost their comrades and were still traumatized from the war. A celebration was a little forced. The rewards had already been distributed to the instructors. Xiao Ju was very generous and distributed all the spoils of war to the soldiers. She didn't keep the rewards from Her Majesty for herself either. When Qing Lisu arrived at the wilderness, she went to find Xiao Ju. He Yan, on the other hand, went to the other side of Mount Hong. These days, she did not go to the martial arts arena, so the number of times she met with them was much less. Xiao Mai saw him and shouted, He Gu, you're here. He Yan sat down beside her. How are you? Hong Shan handed her a piece of roasted rabbit meat. Are you feeling better? I see that you're not holding a stick anymore. Can you go now? He Yan took the rabbit meat. The rabbit meat was roasted until it was sizzling with oil. During the winter, all the wild beasts were hibernating, so rabbits were difficult to catch. Just the smell of it made her hungry. She took a bite and chewed as she said, not bad. In another 2 months, I'll be able to fight alongside you all again. Forget it, Wang Ba said with disgust. Aren't you the only one in the limelight every time? I heard that the higher-ups gave you 10 taels of silver as a reward. He was very jealous. You're rich. Brother, he almost lost his life. 10 taels of silver is nothing. He should get a bigger share. Jiang Jiao said, but I thought that brother he would get a promotion this time. I didn't expect that he didn't. He Yan was angry when this matter was brought up. Logically speaking, she made a contribution and helped the Liang province guards. No matter what, she shouldn't be a small soldier. Even if she didn't get a promotion, she should go to the 9 Flags Battalion. Even if she didn't go to the 9 Flags Battalion, she should go to the Vanguard Battalion. But now, she received more rewards than normal recruits, but promotion? She didn't even see a shadow. Was it so hard to be promoted as a soldier under Xiao Ju? Don't say any more. If you continue, brother he will get angry again. Huang Xiong saw that she was unhappy and said, "You've already won over everyone in the Liang province guards. Even if it's not now, you'll get a promotion sooner or later. Don't worry." He Yan went against her conscience and said, "I'm not worried." It was just that she tossed and turned on her bed in the middle of the night. She wanted nothing more than to rush into the room next door and grab Xiao Ju and ask her why. Although the celebratory banquet was a celebratory banquet, Xiao Ju wasn't here. The rewards had already been distributed to everyone, so tonight was just a gathering of the recruits. The Liang province guards were next to Mount Baiyue, while the southern prefecture guards were next to Wulu River. They minded their own business. Shi Tu poured He Yan a bowl of wine and said, "Drink." He Yan stared at the wine in the bowl. "I'm injured right now. I can't drink so much." "That's right. I almost forgot." Hong Shan took the bowl away. "Then don't drink. Just drink water." He Yan said, "Okay." After sitting for a while, she heard someone call her from behind. "Brother He." He Yan turned around and was stunned. It was actually Chu Zhao. By Chu Zhao's side, there was also that beautiful maidservant, Ying Xiang. It was rare to see such a beautiful woman in the Liang province guards. For a moment, Hong Shan and the others were stunned. Wang Ba whispered, "This brat. Why does he always have such good luck with women?" He thought that he was whispering, but everyone present heard him. Ying Xiang couldn't help but laugh. Chu Zhao also laughed. "I already told brother He that I would definitely drink with you today." Ying Xiang said, "Before our young master came, he specially brought Chang and Chun. Please drink with us, young master He." As soon as she finished speaking, she heard Wang Ba gulp loudly. He Yan. She was in a bit of a dilemma. If she knew that she was drinking with Chu Zhao, would Xiao Ju think that she was in cahoots with Chu Zhao? It would really be snowing in June. As if he could see her dilemma, Chu Zhao smiled and said, "It's just a cup. If it's inconvenient for brother He, then it's fine." He Yan had always been amenable to coaxing, but not coercion. Seeing such an immortal young master being so gentle and knowing when to advance or retreat, she felt a bit apologetic. She wasn't some important person, so why would he personally invite her? It was just a cup of wine. She could just treat it as returning the favor of that silver ingot. He Yan said, "It's just a cup of wine. There's nothing inconvenient about it." "Then please follow this servant, young master He." Ying Xiang turned around with a smile. He Yan originally thought that Chu Zhao was talking about drinking in the wilderness where the recruits were. Who would have thought that he would bring her to Chu Zhao's room? She didn't know if Xiao Ju was using her position to take revenge, but Chu Zhao's room really couldn't be considered luxurious. It couldn't even compare to Cheng Li Su's room. It was just a bit better than the bunk rooms the recruits had. However, the courtyard was very large. On the stone bench in the courtyard, there was a jug of wine and some dried fruits and snacks. "I didn't know what young master He likes to eat, so I casually prepared some side dishes," Ying Xiang said, ashamed. "If it's not to your liking, I ask that young master He be more tolerant. There's no need to be so polite. It's already very good." He Yan was overwhelmed by the favor. She was only a recruit in the Liang province guard. This was the first time she was treated like someone with status. However, He Yan was also secretly curious. Why was Chu Zhao treating her so well? She was just a recruit. There was no need to be so polite. Just as she was thinking this, Ing Xiang had already picked up the white jade jug on the table and poured it into 2 jade cups. She smiled and said, I heard young Master Lin say that young master he is injured, so it is inconvenient for you to drink. This spring of Chang'an is mild and not strong. It is sweet in the mouth. Young master he should be fine after drinking a little. He Yen smiled and said, Miss Ing Xiang is still the most considerate. Ing Xiang pursed her lips and smiled. She put down the jug of wine and retreated behind Chu Zhao. Last time when I saw brother he in Shuajing, I was in too much of a hurry and didn't get to know you well. Chu Zhao smiled and said, since we met in Liang province, it seems that we are fated to meet. Let's drink a toast. He raised his wine cup and lightly tapped it against the air in front of He Yen. He Yen understood and raised his wine cup as well. He thought to himself, last time during the middle of autumn, he got drunk and got into a fight with Xiao Ju. He even crushed his zither. He definitely couldn't repeat the same mistake tonight. However, this wine wasn't strong, so she wouldn't get drunk like last time. Moreover, she only drank a little, so there shouldn't be any problems. She tilted her head back and poured all the wine in the wine cup down her throat. He Yen was stunned. Chu Zhao was also stunned. After a long while, Chu Zhao smiled and said, brother he is indeed forthright. He Yen, he had a habit of drinking in one gulp. He wanted to drink in small sips, but his hands were subconsciously moving. When he came back to his senses, he regretted it so much that his intestines turned green. He really wanted to scold himself, why couldn't I control my hands? However, He Yen praised, what a fragrant wine. Ing Xiang snickered. Chang'an spring isn't something you can drink every day. In the Chu estate, there's only one remaining pot left this year, and it's here. Is it that precious? He Yen was shocked and pushed the wine cup back. He didn't dare to drink anymore. Although this wine is precious, it can't be compared to you, brother He. Chu Zhao smiled. He reached out to take the wine pot and filled He Yan's empty wine cup. Without Chang'an spring, you can buy the 18 immortals. Without like-minded friends, you won't be able to find them so easily. He Yen, she said, brother Chu, do you know that you're the #1 dreamer of all the women in Dawei? Chu Zhao was stunned. Now, I think you can add men into the list. He was so gentle and generous to men. Any man who stayed with him would be in danger. The courtyard was silent. After a while, Chu Zhao laughed heartily. He shook his head and said, brother He, you're really interesting. I'm telling the truth. He Yen was very sincere. Brother He, you flatter me. He waved his hand. I don't dare to be #1. Chang'an spring smelled refreshing. It wasn't as fragrant and strong as the 18 immortals, but it was quite strong. He Yen felt a little lightheaded. When he saw the gentle and charming smile of the person in front of him, he raised his wine cup and said, brother Chu, you deserve it. Let me toast you. He downed the wine in one gulp. On the other side, Lin Shuanghe was looking around for He Yen. Have you seen He Yen? He asked. Xiao Mai had finished eating the barbecued meat. She went to steal some from the bonfire. When she heard him, she turned around and said, are you looking for Ahigo? Ahigo was just taken away by 4th young Master Chu from the capital. Chu Zhao. Lin Shuanghe asked curiously, why did he take brother He away? To drink. Xiao Mai scratched her head. He said he would treat Ahigo to a taste of Chang'an spring. When Lin Shuanghe heard the news, he immediately rushed back. When he reached Xiao Ju's room, the door wasn't closed. He pushed it open. Xiao Ju was sitting at the table, wiping her sword. Chang'an spring wasn't an ordinary sword. It had to be cleaned every day to ensure that the blade was crystal clear. Lin Shuanghe asked, do you know where He Yen went? Xiao Ju didn't bother to answer him. Chu Zhao took him to drink. Xiaoju looked up. So, aren't you worried, big brother? Lin Shuanghe slammed his fan on the table. That's Chu Zhao we're talking about. Move aside. Xiaoju said unhappily, you're blocking the light. Lin Shuanghe moved to the side. Don't wipe it. In public, Chu Zhao is Su Jingfu's man. If he wants to recruit He Yan to his camp, what will you do? I heard that He Yan's strength is one of the best in the Liangzhou guards. If such a talent falls into Su Jingfu's hands, it will be very troublesome. When he saw that Xiaoju's expression didn't change, he went around to the other side. In private, how can you let your girl drink with another man? As soon as he said this, Xiaoju stopped what he was doing. He looked up and glanced at Lin Shuanghe. Who told you that she's mine? Come on. Lin Shuanghe obviously didn't believe him. If she's not yours, how can you let her live next door with a door in between? You even let her pick the lock. How come I didn't realize that you could do this before? Are you interested? Xiaoju. If you don't have anything else to say, then get out. Don't bother me. Xiao Huijin, you're not Chu Xilan's opponent if you're so fierce. As he spoke, he heard a rustling sound coming from the middle door of the house, as if a mouse was shuttling in and out of the clutter. The two of them looked up and saw a silver wire sticking out of the keyhole on the door. The silver wire twisted in a crooked manner and accurately pushed the lock pin inwards. With a clack, the lock fell to the ground and the door opened. Lin Shuanghe clapped his hands. Good skill. Then he looked at Xiaoju. And you said she's not yours. Xiaoju was speechless for a moment and stood up. He Yan walked over from the door. She walked very slowly and steadily. When she saw Lin Shuanghe, she even greeted Lin Shuanghe with her hands cupped together. Brother Lin. Lin Shuanghe. Why aren't you calling me Dr. Lin anymore? He Yan acted as if she didn't see him and walked over to Xiaoju. Xiaoju's gaze fell on He Yan. The young man was wearing the red uniform of the Liang province guards. His hair was neat and tidy as he bowed respectfully to Lin Shuanghe. At this moment, Lin Shuanghe and Xiaoju were both stunned. The window wasn't closed and the wind blew in, causing the scrolls on the table to flip slightly. It brought with it a burst of coolness and a faintly discernible aroma of wine. It was faint but not real. The sweet and refreshing smell was like the spring day in Chang'an City, sparkling and beautiful. Her gaze was even more sparkling than the spring sun. Xiaoju felt a chill run down his spine as he felt a sense of déjà vu. She vaguely remembered that someone had looked at her with the same gaze on the night of mid-autumn. Have you been drinking? As he spoke, he subconsciously pushed Wan Xiangqin closer. When this person was drunk, it was impossible to tell if she was sober or not just by looking at her face. However, her actions would only be inconceivable. Lin Shuanghe smiled and picked up his tea, planning to take a sip and watch the show. He Yan looked up and gave Xiaoju a big smile. I can memorize the way to university now, father. Lin Shuanghe spat out his tea. Chapter 121. I know how to recite, father. Xiaoju looked at her in disbelief. What did you just call me? He Yan stared at him with clear eyes and said seriously, the way of the university is to be virtuous, to be close to the people, and to stop at being virtuous. Knowing when to stop leads to steadfastness, being calm leads to tranquility, being calm leads to thoughtfulness, being straightforward leads to virtue. There is a root and an end to everything, and there is a beginning and end to everything. Knowledge is to investigate things. One is to cultivate one's body. The thickest is the thinnest, and the thinnest is the last. Lin Shuanghe was stunned at first, but then he gradually reacted. He pointed at He Yan and asked Xiaoju, is my little sister drunk? He Yan suddenly rushed over and threw herself into Xiaoju's arms. She hugged his waist and almost pushed Xiaoju back 2 steps. She buried her face in his chest and rubbed it. She stammered, "Father, I know how to recite. I've improved." There was a dead silence in the room. It was hard to describe Xiao Ju's ugly expression with just a few words. Lin Shuanghe covered his face and his shoulders shook. He couldn't stop laughing. "Io, Huijin, I've seen people treat you like a husband, but this is the first time I've seen someone treat you like a father. How does it feel to be a father? This little girl is too obedient. She's very good at reciting books. She's very talented." As if encouraged by Lin Shuanghe's words, He Yan raised her head from Xiao Ju's chest and stared at Xiao Ju with sparkling eyes. "Father, I'm now the first in the Yangzhou guards." Xiao Ju grabbed her arm and tried to pull her hand away from his waist. "Let go." "No." He Yan was very strong. Xiao Ju didn't know if it was because she threw rocks every day, but he couldn't pull her hand away. He Yan raised his head and looked at him. "You can test me. I can answer anything." She looked like a child who got first place and wagged her tail to show off. Xiao Ju facepalmed. "Let go first." "No." She hugged Xiao Ju's waist even tighter and wanted to stick her whole body to him. Xiao Ju desperately moved back, trying to distance himself from her and not let his body touch hers. Unfortunately, it was futile. Xiao Ju wanted to pull He Yan's hand away. Lin Shuanghe said, "Sister He Yan is still injured. If you move her, you'll to do it. Another half a year has passed, and it's not good." Xiao Ju's to Xiao Ju. "Just let her hug you for a while to be. She was a little girl who had come all the way to Yangzhou and hadn't been home for so long. She must be missing her father." He made a hugging gesture. "Can't you give her the warmth of home? Don't be so petty. You're not the one who's at a disadvantage." Xiao Ju was about to speak, but the person in her arms had already buried her head in her chest. She continued to recite in a muffled voice. "You are a general. You are both tough and soft. You are also a general. Mortals judge generals by their bravery. Bravery is one of the few things that make up a general. A brave man must be flexible. If he is flexible and does not know the benefits, it is impossible. Therefore, there are 5 things to be cautious about. The first is reason, the second is preparation, the third is fruit, the fourth is war, and the fifth is agreement. Reason is to govern the masses as if they are widows. Preparation is to go out as if they are facing the enemy. Fruit is to face the enemy without thinking. Although the war is to defeat the enemy, the war is to start. Receiving an order and not rejecting it. Returning after defeating the enemy is the etiquette of a general. The day my teacher came out, there was glory in death, no disgrace in life." Lin Shuanghe listened in a daze. He knew the previous one, but he didn't know this one. He asked Xiao Ju, "What is my He Mimi reciting?" "Wu Zi's Art of War, Treatise on Generals." Xiao Ju was slightly surprised. She actually knew this. "My He Mimi is really knowledgeable." Lin Shuanghe praised, "You can even recite this." "Of course." He Yan poked her head out from Xiao Ju's arms. "As a general, this is how it should be. He Mimi is really ambitious." Lin Shuanghe smiled and said, "You want to be a general. I was originally a female general." Good. Lin Shuanghe smiled and covered his face with his fan. "Look at your ability." He Yan raised her head again and looked up at Xiao Ju. She happily asked, "Father, did I recite it well?" "Father again." Xiao Ju's feelings at this moment were indescribable. Outside the door, Shenhan had just walked in when he saw 2 people hugging through the open window. When he looked again, it was actually Xiao Ju hugging He Yan. He Yan hugged Xiao Ju's waist and said something softly. Shenhan was stunned and his face turned red. He only felt that it was unbelievable. Damn it. Although he already knew that the relationship between these two was not ordinary, seeing such an intimate scene with his own eyes was still shocking. Shen Han pondered the meaning of Xiao Zhu's words. Could it be that she still had feelings for He Yan? Perhaps they had already renewed their previous relationship and reunited? There was still Lin Shuanghe in the room. She just stood there and watched. Didn't she feel that she was the extra one? Xiao Zhu was being intimate with He Yan. Didn't she feel awkward being watched by Lin Shuanghe? The big shots from Shuajing were really hard to understand. In an instant, Shen Han felt tired. He turned around and tiptoed away. Forget it. I'll just pretend that I didn't see anything. In the room, Lin Shuanghe was about to die of laughter. Xiao Zhu's face was ashen. She tried several times to pull He Yan down but failed. He Yan hugged his waist tightly as if he was hugging a family heirloom. Father, I've improved. I'm number one now. Why aren't you saying anything? She was a little sad. Can you praise me? Xiao Zhu said, I'm not your father. It would have been better if he didn't say this. As soon as he said this, He Yan's eyes suddenly filled with tears. She looked at him tearfully as if he had done something evil. She asked, You don't recognize me either? Xiao Zhu paused. Suddenly, an inexplicable sense of irritation appeared in his heart. He was most afraid of women's tears. Especially in this situation, it seemed as if he was the one who made He Yan cry. Sure enough, the divine hand in white, who was most protective of girls, immediately stood up for his newly recognized sister. He said, It's just a matter of one sentence. Look at how you made the little girl cry. She's such a sensible and smart child. If you don't recognize her, others will rush to recognize her. Xiao Huijin, quickly praise her. Immediately, right now. Xiao Zhu was speechless. He suppressed his anger and lowered his head to look at her. She was still dressed like a teenager, but her frowning and pitiful appearance was really a little girl. Perhaps she had mistaken him for He Sui. Oh, but was He Sui usually very strict with her? Even when he was drunk, he had to gain his father's approval. In an instant, Xiao Zhu saw his own shadow in this girl. He was discouraged and resigned to his fate. He gave up trying to pull her hand and said, You did very well. Really? He Yan immediately looked at him with sparkling eyes. Really? Xiao Zhu spoke against his conscience. Thank you. She was a little embarrassed. I'll do better next time. I'll make father even more proud. Xiao Zhu had a splitting headache. He only said, Then let go of me first. You're hugging me too tightly. But I really like hugging father. He Yan revealed a very satisfied smile. She greedily hugged him and did not want to let go. I've wanted to hug father like this for a long time. Why can my brothers and sisters do it, but I can't? Lin Shuanghe was still smiling. When he heard this, his heart ached so much that tears almost fell. He only said, Is sister He being bullied at home? Her father doesn't even hug her. Xiao Zhu was also very puzzled. In the secret letter from Shuajing, He Sui only had one son and one daughter. He Yan only had one brother. How could he have a sister? I'm number one now. He Yan stared at Xiao Zhu and said, Father, aren't you happy? Xiao Zhu, he said expressionlessly, I'm very happy. Then what do I get as a reward? Reward? Xiao Zhu frowned. What reward do you want? He Yan rubbed her face against the buttons in front of his lapel. Her face was very hot and it was very cool. However, Xiao Zhu's body stiffened. You, don't touch me. As soon as he said this, he saw He Yan let go of his lapel. She felt something from his waist and proudly showed it to Xiao Zhu. I want this. That won't do. Xiao Zhu reached out to snatch it, but He Yan dodged. This person was drunk and her mind was not clear. However, she was still agile and her footsteps were not messy. Just by looking at her appearance, one could not tell that she was drunk. He Yan lowered her head and looked at the thing in her hand. It was a jade pendant carved with a snake. It was a rare black jade. It was warm and cold to the touch. One look and she knew it was a treasure. She loved it so much that she could not put it down. "Thank you, father." Xiao Ju was so angry that he laughed. "I didn't say I'm giving it to you." Lin Shuanghe stopped him from snatching the jade. He said, "Why are you arguing with a drunk person? Let her play with it now. Tomorrow when you're sober, you can ask her for medicine. How can she not give it to you?" However, he touched his chin. "Sister, he has good taste. She saw the most valuable thing on you at first glance. Not bad." Xiao Ju was too lazy to pay attention to him. However, she did not try to snatch the jade from He Yan. "Watch me." Lin Shuanghe walked in front of He Yan and coughed lightly. "Brother He, let me ask you. Do you like this jade?" He Yan played with the jade pendant in his hand. "I like it." "Do you like Chu Xilan?" "Chu Xilan?" He Yan asked in confusion, "Who is that?" "You're drunk and don't remember this person. It seems like you're not with Chu Xiao." Lin Shuanghe smiled. "Then do you like Xiao Ju?" "Xiao Ju, are you done?" He Yan's answer was unexpected. She looked up as if she was thinking about the name. After a while, she nodded. "I like it." Lin Shuanghe's eyes lit up. "What do you like about him?" "Medicine, for me." He Yan held his head. "I'm so sleepy." After he finished speaking, he fell on the soft couch and fell asleep. Lin Shuanghe stood up straight. She said waste. Xiao Ju did not hear what He Yan said. She was a bit annoyed. "What? She likes your waist." Lin Shuanghe opened his fan. "She's too direct." Xiao Ju threw a teacup at him. "Get lost." On the other side, Ying Xiang put away the empty wine pot in the room. The smell of spring in Chang'an still lingered in the courtyard. Chu Xiao took off his outer garment and sat down on the couch wearing only his inner garment. The beds in the Liang province guards were not as hard as the beds in the capital. Although they were not as hard as the beds, they were not comfortable. Ying Xiang walked over and knelt in front of the couch. "Young master, this servant did not do a good job and was not able to win over He Yan." The youth called He Yan was very young. Just now, he drank a pot of wine and looked drunk. However, he wanted to discuss the art of war with Chu Xiao. Chu Xiao did not understand the art of war, so he listened to the youth speak with assurance. In the end, he probably got tired and left alone. Ying Xiang was very confident in her appearance. Although she did not dare to say that everyone would fall for her beauty, such as Xiao Huijin and Chu Xilan, she was more than enough to deal with a new recruit of the Liang province guards. Who knew that tonight, no matter how gentle and flirtatious she appeared, He Yan's gaze was only filled with admiration and no evil thoughts. Men had different tastes for women, and it could be seen at a glance. Although He Yan was shocked by her beauty, he did not have any other thoughts. This made Ying Xiang feel defeated. When her master, Chu Xiao, heard this, he was stunned for a moment. Then, he shook his head and smiled. "It's not your fault." Ying Xiang raised her head. Fourth young master, Chu Xiao looked at the incense burning on the table in the room. This was the calming incense he had brought from the capital. He was always a light sleeper, so he always brought it with him wherever he went. His eyes flashed back to when he caught a glimpse of the woman's lively eyes under the white veil at the horse track in the capital. Who would have thought that there would be a woman among the new recruits of the Liang province guards? He slowly smiled. When He Yan woke up, he was in his own room. He was sleeping soundly with half of his legs dangling off the bed. He did not even cover himself with a blanket. Outside the room, the sun was just right. A ray of light shone in through the window. It was so bright that it hurt his eyes. For a moment, he could not tell whether it was day or night. He Yan sat up and shook his head. He did not feel the pain of a hangover. On the contrary, he felt refreshed. She thought to herself that Chang and Spring was indeed much better than the inferior yellow wine of the Liang province guards. Although the alcohol was strong, it did not go to the head. There was a reason why it was expensive. Last night, she had been dragged away by Chu Zhao and his servant girl. She had gone to Chu Zhao's room to drink 2 cups of wine. She seemed to have drunk a bit too much. The alcohol had gotten to her head and made her very sleepy. She did not know when she had returned to her room and fell asleep. However, judging from the current situation, she should not have caused any trouble like last time. He Yen planned to get out of bed and pour himself a cup of tea. After a night's sleep, he was very thirsty. As soon as he moved, he felt something in his hand. When he looked down, he found that his right hand was tightly clutching something that looked like a jade pendant. What kind of toy was this? When did it get into her hand? He Yen was stunned for a moment. He opened his palm and carefully examined it. The black jade pendant in his palm was not big, but it was very delicately carved. The snake pattern was complicated and gorgeous. As she moved, it emitted a gentle light. It did not look like an ordinary jade pendant. Did she get drunk and rob someone last night? He Yen and the jade pendant stared at each other for a moment. They were still at a loss. Forget it. He might as well go out and ask someone else. He Yen thought for a moment. He first put the jade pendant on the table. Then, he got up and washed up. When he was done, he grabbed the jade pendant and went out. He also wanted to ask Song Tao Tao if there were any leftover steamed buns. He had woken up too late in the morning and did not even make it in time for breakfast. As soon as he went out, he met Shen Muxue, who lived not far from here. Shen Muxue was carrying a medicine tray to the medical hall. When he saw He Yen, he stopped and greeted He Yen. "Miss Shen," He Yen asked, "is eldest Miss Song here?" "I have something to discuss with her." Shen Muxue said, "She is not in the room. She went to the martial arts arena." "Why are you looking for her?" "If it is important, I will help you pass on the message when she comes back later." He Yen scratched his head. "It is not a big deal. Since she is not here, forget it." He turned around and was about to leave. When he moved, the jade pendant in his hand was revealed. Shen Muxue was stunned. He hesitated and said, "This jade, She seemed to know who the owner of this jade pendant was. Miss Shen has seen this jade pendant before." He Yen smiled calmly. Shen Muxue still looked surprised. "Why do you have the governor's jade pendant?" "Xiao Ju's." "Xiao Ju's jade pendant, why is it with her?" He Yen also wanted to ask this question. She also did not know. What did she do when she was drunk last night? Did she fight with Xiao Ju again and snatch his jade pendant? Looking at Shen Muxue's suspicious eyes, He Yen coughed twice. "This is indeed the governor's jade pendant. When we were talking yesterday, Governor felt that it was inconvenient to wear it, so he asked me to keep it for him for the time being. I was about to give it back to him. But, Miss Shen, brother He." Lin Shuanghe's voice came from behind. He must have heard the conversation between He Yen and Shen Muxue. He smiled and waved his fan. "Miss Shen, are you going to the medical center?" Shen Muxue nodded slightly. "Then go quickly. The medicine will be cold if you are late." He then said to He Yen, "Brother He, you have not eaten yet, right? I still have some pastries. Just eat some to fill your stomach." He Yen said, "Thank you, young Master Lin." Shen Muxue bid farewell to the two of them. He Yen followed Lin Shuanghe to his room. She hesitated and wanted to ask questions, but she did not know where to start. Lin Shuanghe put a few plates of salty pastries on the table and poured a cup of hot tea for her. Seeing her hesitant appearance, he smiled and said, "Are you still thinking about the jade pendant?" He Yen was surprised. "You know, last night, When Sister He got drunk and entered the room in Huijin, I was there from beginning to end. Lin Shuanghe supported his chin with the handle of his fan. Sister He really opened my eyes. He Yan felt more and more uneasy after hearing his words. But thinking carefully, she always had a sense of propriety. It was impossible for her to make a scene and lose her composure after getting drunk. At most, she would spar with Xiao Ju. But how could Xiao Ju be so weak? Not only was she beaten up, but she also had the jade pendant stolen from her. Last night. I didn't do anything out of line, right? She asked tentatively. It would have been better if she did not ask. As soon as she said this, Lin Shuanghe seemed to have thought of an interesting scene. He first tried to hold back his laughter, then couldn't hold it in anymore. He slapped the table and laughed wildly. He Yan looked at this refined young man who was laughing uncontrollably. He did not care about his image at all. He did not look like the elegant young master from Shua capital. He Yan was so anxious that her heart was scratching. She waited for Lin Shuanghe to finish laughing before asking, Dr. Lin, what did I do to make you laugh so hard? Nothing, nothing. Lin Shuanghe waved his hand and smiled. Actually, it was nothing big. I just wanted to let Xiao Huijin experience what it feels like to be a father at such a young age. He Yan dropped the scallion pastry in her hand onto the table. Did I call him father? Lin Shuanghe asked curiously. You actually still remember? He Yan covered her face. She really did not remember. But she remembered that when she was young, there was also a family banquet. At that time, she had gone from the last place to the third place from the bottom, hoping to be praised by her father. In the end, no one cared. During the family banquet, she accidentally drank a mouthful of plum wine as Ismanthus do. At that time, He Yan had not yet joined the army. She did not have the tolerance to drink 1,000 cups and was drunk after 1 cup. After she was drunk, she hugged He Yuanliang's leg and called him father. She even asked He Yuanliang for a reward. When she woke up the next day, the He family said that it was because He Yuansheng was too strict with He Yan. That was why she thought that second uncle was acting coquettishly. Madame He, however, did not like it and scolded her in the room so that she would not say anything wrong in the future. But in the end, it became a hurdle in her heart that she could not get over. Because she had never been acknowledged, she especially looked forward to it. Because she saw other sisters acting coquettishly with their fathers, she longed for her father to pat her on the head and say, "You did well." Perhaps it was because she saw Lin Shuanghe in the Yangzhou Guards, which reminded her of the things that happened when she was young. What she thought about during the day, she dreamed about it at night. Even when she was drunk, she could not avoid it. Instead, she became a joke. Forget it. What was done was done. So what if she could turn back time? He Yan put the jade in her hand on the table. What is this? This is Huijin's reward for you. Lin Shuanghe held back his laughter. Reward? You memorized very well. You memorized The Way of University and Wu Zi's Art of War in front of Huijin. Huijin was very pleased and gave you this jade as a reward. He Yan. I snatched it, didn't I? Lin Shuanghe failed to hold back his laughter and laughed loudly. As he laughed, he slapped his fan. Sister He, you didn't see Huijin's face at that time. I've known him for so long, but it's the first time I've seen him so embarrassed. Which woman in this world would dare to hug him and not let go? He was forced to retreat step by step. He even gave away his family heirloom jade and had nothing to say. Only you, sister. He cupped his fists at He Yan. Only you. He Yan was dizzy from his words. She caught the key words in his words. Family heirloom? She looked at the jade on the table. This one. The night before Madame Zhao's zodiac, she dreamed of a big black snake with 2 pieces of jade in its mouth. It was circling around the pillar in front of their residence. Later, after Xiao Jing was born, she took the name Ruby. There was a bandit gentleman, like gold, or tin, like a jade. After Xiao Ju was born, her family name was Huijin. He Yan said, Huijin held Yushi, so he couldn't show his poverty. Yes, that's what it means. Lin Shuanghe put away his fan. The two brothers' names are both related to jade. Because Madame Xiao dreamed of the big black snake, the Empress Dowager bestowed a two-colored jade, half black and half white. It was made into two jade pendants with snake patterns. The white one was given to Xiao Ruby, and the black one was given to Xiao Huijin. Ever since I've known Xiao Huijin, I've never seen this jade pendant leave his body. He Yan looked at the jade pendant in front of her and suddenly felt that it weighed more than 1,000 pounds of gold. That's why I said, Sister He, you have a very good eye. Lin Shuanghe praised, of Xiao Huijin's entire body, apart from himself, this jade pendant is the most valuable thing. You didn't miss out on either of them and took them all. Brilliant, amazing, beautiful. Chapter 122. On the way to the practice field, He Yan was still thinking about what Lin Shuanghe had said. The snake-patterned black jade in her hand was as cold as water. In the winter, it was so cold that it cleared her mind. Yesterday, he had gotten drunk and stolen Xiao Ju's jade. To be able to do such a shocking thing, it seemed that in the future, she really couldn't drink as she pleased. As He Yan thought, she had already reached the side of the practice field. In front of Xiao Ju stood a person wearing the black armor of the Southern Fu army. His head was lowered and he didn't speak. When he got closer, Xiao Ju said coldly, "This is your formation." That person was probably his vice commander, the leader in charge of the Southern Fu army's formation. He looked tall and strong, but in front of Xiao Ju, he was like a child who had made a mistake. He lowered his head and said, "This subordinate knows his mistake. Everyone might not be used to the snowy weather in Liangzhou." "Not used to it?" Second young master Xiao glanced at him and asked, "Do you need me to teach you how to get used to it?" He Yan clearly saw that the tall and sturdy man was so frightened by Xiao Ju's words that he trembled. He said, "This subordinate will take them to train right now." "Double the daily training," Xiao Ju said calmly. "If this happens again, you don't have to stay in the Liangzhou guard anymore." "Yes." The man obediently left again. He Yan craned his neck to look at the martial arts field. He saw that after the man left, he poured a torrent of abuse on the southern prefecture soldiers standing in front of him, and once again began to drill the military formation. He couldn't help but be speechless. Xiao Ju's attitude towards the southern prefecture soldiers was different from his attitude towards the Liang province guard recruits. He rarely showed his face towards the Liang province guard recruits, while he was more distant towards Shenhan and the others, and was even more courteous. Only when he faced the Southern Fu army did he truly show his usual self. Casual, cold, like a military governor who would scold people at the slightest disagreement. When she was General Fei Hong, was she also this annoying? He Yan silently reflected on himself. Just as she was thinking, Xiao Ju turned around. When she saw her, she paused for a moment before asking impatiently, "What are you doing here again?" He Yan smiled apologetically and stretched out her palm. There was a piece of black jade lying in her palm. She said, "Governor, you seem to have left something with me last night. I'm specially returning it to you." "Return?" Xiao Ju chewed on the word her playfully. She bent over and stared into her eyes. Her lips twitched as she said indifferently, "My dear daughter is so considerate." He Yan, why was this person so vengeful? Besides, even if she called him daddy, it was Xiao Ju who took advantage of her. Why did Xiao Ju make it sound like she had done something unforgivable? He Yan tried his best to maintain his composure and only said, "Governor, you really know how to joke. This piece of black jade looks very precious. Governor, please don't lose it in the future. You should take good care of it." She picked up the jade and reached out to touch Xiao Ju's waist. Xiao Ju took a step back and looked alarmed. What are you doing? I'm putting it on for you. He Yan had an innocent look on her face. Isn't this jade supposed to be tied around the waist? Xiao Ju suddenly remembered what Lin Shuanghe had said yesterday, she likes your waist. He Yan wanted to step forward, but Xiao Ju raised his hand to stop her. He looked at her with a complicated expression. I'll do it myself. Oh. He Yan did not understand and handed the jade to him. She watched as Xiao Ju put the jade back on. The black jade fell on his dark blue robe and looked very beautiful. She looked at it seriously. Little did she know that Xiao Ju saw her like this and narrowed his eyes. He immediately turned around and pulled down his robe. Was he stung by an insect? He Yan was puzzled. Inside the martial arts arena, the soldiers' loud orders could be heard. He Yan followed him to the edge of the balcony and looked down. The South House soldiers were already very organized, and their morale was also outstanding. This kind of strong soldier, he almost scolded them to tears just now. What was wrong with Xiao Ju? Wasn't he too picky? If he took over the Fuyue army, he would not have enough time to scold them. He would not even have enough time to eat. He Yan looked and said what was on his mind. She said, they are training well. You were too fierce just now. Fierce? Yes. He Yan said, if it was me, I would have been scared to death. Xiao Ju laughed again. Her smile was a little mocking. I don't think you think I'm fierce. That's because I'm used to being scolded. He Yan looked down at the Nanfu army. Arrow formation. Xiao Ju said, how is it? They are already very well trained. It's just that the snow has been slippery recently. The soldiers on the left of the last row can't keep up. Other than the arrow formation, what other formations do you know? Xiao Ju asked casually. There are a lot, He Yan counted with her fingers, star scattering formation, mandarin ducks formation, fish lowly formation, crane wing formation. She listed more than 10 formations in a row. Seeing that Xiao Ju's gaze was focused on her body, she unconsciously stopped and asked, why are you looking at me? Xiao Ju turned around and placed her hands on the railing of the balcony. She smiled lazily and said, I'm looking at how good you are, female general. He Yan, she decided to be thick-skinned and said, I'm so good. Won't you consider promoting me to be your right-hand man? Our swords together will definitely be able to cut through the universe. Xiao Ju sneered, who's talking to you about our? Don't keep people at arm's length all the time. You should learn to be approachable like me. Xiao Ju ignored her. He Yan was about to say something when a voice called out from behind him, young master. It was Fei Nu, young master. Fei Nu looked at He Yan, there's movement in Lei Ho. Xiao Ju nodded, I know. He turned around and walked downstairs. He was probably going to the dungeon. He Yan wanted to follow him but stopped after taking a step. Forget it. If something really happened, Xiao Ju would know even if he didn't say anything. If he followed him now, he wouldn't be an eyesore to Xiao Ju. It would be better to find Chu Zhao and ask him if she did anything inappropriate to Chu Zhao when she was drunk yesterday. If she did, she would have to line up and apologize. Thinking of this, she waved at Xiao Ju, I still have something to do. I won't accompany you. See you later. The corner of Slave Fei's mouth twitched. Look at how familiar she was. Did someone invite her? Xiao Ju was already used to He Yan's shameless behavior. She walked down the stairs and said, let's go. When He Yan went to Chu Zhao's room, Chu Zhao was practicing calligraphy. Yesterday, she came in a hurry and it was late at night. She only drank in the courtyard and didn't notice Chu Zhao's room. She only felt that it wasn't luxurious enough. Today, she saw it and realized that it wasn't luxurious enough. It was simple and crude. Other than a table and a bed, there were only 2 chairs in the room. There were no decorations at all. However, this 4th young master Chu was quite happy with himself. He even put incense in the room and hung a gauze curtain. Therefore, the originally simple room looked like a hermit's room. Xiang saw her and smiled. Young master He, are you here to see our young master? Oh, He Yen said, I came to give fourth young master Chu some snacks. She raised the box. Inside the box was the unfinished scallion oil pastry that Lin Shuanghe gave her in the morning. He Yen originally wanted to leave some for when she was hungry. However, it wouldn't be good to come empty-handed when she came to see Chu Zhao. Thus, she reluctantly considered it a greeting gift. Fourth young master is practicing calligraphy, Xiang said with a smile. Young master He, please follow this servant. He Yen followed her inside and saw Chu Zhao sitting at the table and writing. She stood behind Chu Zhao and couldn't help but read aloud. There is not a speck of dust on the green mountain, not a cloud in the blue sky. There is only one moon in the sky, only one person in the mountain. At this time I hear the sound of the pine, at this time I hear the sound of the bell, at this time I hear the sound of the stream, at this time I hear the sound of insects. As soon as she finished speaking, Chu Zhao finished writing the last stroke. He turned his head and saw her. He smiled and said, Brother He, you're here. He Yen walked around the words he had written and praised. Young Master Chu's handwriting is really good. Chu Zhao's handwriting was different from Xiao Ju's. Xiao Ju's handwriting was sharp and forceful. It carried a kind of cold and unbridled feeling. Chu Zhao's handwriting, on the other hand, was beautiful and gentle, just like the feeling he gave people. His poems were also simple and elegant. It was really hard to imagine that he would be related to Su Jingfu. However, when she thought about Su Jingfu, if He Yen wasn't close to Xiao Ju now, and if she hadn't heard Ding Yi's words before, in her heart, Su Jingfu would just be an honest and upright old prime minister. Brother He, why did you come to see me? Chu Zhao stood up and put away the pen and paper. He brought He Yen to the only table in the room and sat down. The two chairs were just right. He said to Xiang, pour some tea for young master He. Xiang smiled and went to get the tea. He Yen said, I didn't come to see you for anything. It's just that I drank fourth young master Chu's Chang and Chun last night. I felt bad, so I sent you some snacks. She motioned for Chu Zhao to look at the box of snacks on the table, but she was too embarrassed to open it. After all, it looked too simple. Thank you. Chu Zhao was very considerate. I just wanted to try the snacks of the Liang Province Guard and see how they are different from the ones in Shuo. Brother He sent them just in time. He Yen coughed twice. I almost forgot to ask fourth young master. Last night, I drank 2 cups too much. I didn't cause any trouble for fourth young master, right? She scratched her head. I like to talk nonsense when I'm drunk. If I said something wrong, fourth young master, please don't take it to heart. Chu Zhao looked at her and smiled. Brother He, you didn't come to my place today just to ask me this, right? Look, as expected of the current Prime Minister's favorite student. He was so meticulous that she had nothing to say. As if he could see He Yan's awkwardness and embarrassment, Chu Zhao smiled and said, Don't worry. Brother He didn't do anything last night. All you did was talk to me about the art of war. It's just that I don't know much about the art of war, so I couldn't ask Brother He for advice. I wasted Brother He's effort. He looked at He Yen and sighed. I'm just surprised that Brother He knows so much. He Yen. She silently reflected on herself. In the future, she would never call other people peacocks again. Looking at her drunk appearance, she was the peacock, okay? It was too embarrassing to go around showing off how much she knew when she was drunk. Fourth young master, you flatter me. He Yen covered her face with her hands. If I say more, I'll really be too ashamed to show my face. Xiang came over with 2 cups of tea. She placed 1 cup in front of He Yen and smiled. Young master He, try it. He Yen picked it up and took a sip. She couldn't help but sigh. It's so sweet. Shuo Jing's tea isn't as bitter as Liangzhou's. Ying Xiang placed the other cup in front of Chu Zhao. It's fine as long as young master he likes it. He Yan looked at the tea in front of her and suddenly thought of another matter. She looked at Chu Zhao and pretended to casually ask, "Fourth young master Chu, have you been living in Shuo Jing for a long time?" "Yes." "Then you should know a lot about Shuo Jing's news." He Yan looked at the tea leaves floating in the cup and said, "I've been in Liangzhou for half a year. Here, I've been training hard every day. It's very boring. Ever since I got injured, I didn't even go for daily training. I've been staying in my room all day. I've almost become moldy. It's not easy for a friend from Shuo Jing to visit." She moved closer and looked at Chu Zhao with a burning gaze. "Fourth young master, can you tell me about the interesting things that have happened in Shuo Jing in the past half a year?" "Interesting things?" Chu Zhao was stunned. He Yan nodded. "That's right, it's something fun." "That's a lot." Chu Zhao said warmly. "Brother He, what kind of things do you want to hear?" "What kind of things?" He Yan thought for a moment. "I don't think there's anything particularly interesting about ordinary people. Let's talk about Shuo Jing's official family. For example, the old master was caught red-handed with his wife. Which family's son wasn't their biological son but was actually adopted?" Even though Chu Zhao always had a good temper, he was still choked by He Yan's words. He slowly opened his mouth. "I don't know much about these private matters. I'll pick some that I know and tell Brother He." He Yan hurriedly nodded. Then, she listened to this fourth young master of Count Shi Jin's Fu talk about all the officials in Shuo Jing. However, she didn't hear any of the so-called interesting things. It was nothing more than someone who had been promoted, or someone whose salary had increased by 2 shi. Someone whose memorial was too ugly and was disliked by the emperor. Someone's wife received a rare piece of cloth and gave it to an imperial concubine to please her. Fourth young master Chu was handsome, had a good temperament, and was patient. He wasn't like Xiao Ju who got impatient quickly. However, He Yan almost lost her patience when talking to him. She endured and endured. After drinking 2 cups of tea, she still hadn't heard what she wanted to hear. She couldn't help but interrupt Chu Zhao. "Fourth young master Chu, when you were in Shuo Jing, did you know the current General Fei Hong?" As soon as she said this, Chu Zhao paused. He picked up his tea and took a sip. He asked with a smile, "Why are you suddenly talking about him?" "Every day when I was in the Liang Province Guard, the instructors were always privately discussing who was more powerful, General Fengyun or General Fei Hong. I see General Fengyun every day now, so there's nothing strange about her. However, I've never seen General Fei Hong." She smiled. "You also know that General Fei Hong and I both have the same surname. Perhaps we were from the same family in our previous lives. I just want to hear what's strange about him. Is he really that powerful?" Chu Zhao looked at He Yan. After a while, he shook his head and said with a smile, "General He and I are only officials of the same court. We're not familiar with each other. I've only seen him a few times. He's a good person and very powerful. Back then, he quelled the chaos in Xichang. He was very brave. What about now? Has he been promoted in the capital? He was originally a 3rd-rank military general. If he was promoted too quickly, people would talk behind his back." Chu Zhao said, "However, His Majesty appreciates him very much. Every few days, he would summon him into the palace and have him teach His Highness the Crown Prince swordsmanship. It seems that in the future, he won't be worse than Military Governor Xiao." He Rufei had already reached this level. He Yan's smile froze. Chu Zhao asked, "What's wrong?" He Yan picked up her cup and took a sip to cover it up. She said, "I'm just sighing. We both have the same surname, and he's only a few years older than me. However, his achievements are something that I can't achieve in my lifetime. Brother He, there's no need to belittle yourself." Chu Xiao comforted her with a smile. General Fei Hong also risked his life on the battlefield to achieve his achievements. Moreover, you're still young. In the future, you might not be worse than him. Her words didn't comfort He Yan. She raised her head again, and that heartless smile appeared on her face again. Is that all? What about the rest? General Fei Hong should be engaged at his age. Could it be that he doesn't have a girl he likes? If that's the case, wouldn't it be too tragic? De Wei's two famous generals, Feng Yun and Fei Hong, are they going to be single for the rest of their lives? Chu Xiao paused for a moment. Then he smiled and said, I don't know about that. However, up until now, there hasn't been any news of General Fei Hong getting engaged. He Yan nodded. Why? Chu Xiao smiled and looked at her. Brother He, you have a sister at home. Do you want to? No, no. He Yan hurriedly waved her hands. I only have one younger brother. I've never thought about this. This is General Fei Hong. How can ordinary people like us be related to him? I don't dare to think about it. Chu Xiao nodded thoughtfully. In the dungeon, Xiao Ju sat on a chair and looked at the person in the cell. More than 10 days had passed. Lei Ho's entire body was shockingly thin. It was as if he was a completely different person from 10 days ago. He also did not sleep well. His entire body seemed to be tormented by nightmares. His eye sockets were deeply sunken. The originally tall man had become much more stooped. Fei Nu delivered the letter and said in a low voice, We've found the person who met Lei Ho. The letter came from Jiang. Jiang? Xiao Ju raised her eyebrows. That's right. Xiao Huijin. Lei Ho opened his mouth. His voice seemed to have been burned by fire. It was extremely hoarse. It was as if he would not be able to speak in the next moment. His lips were cracked and bloodshot. He said, I've already written a letter to the person who met me as you said. According to the agreement, you can let my wife and son go. Xiao Ju glanced at him and smiled. In your eyes, am I such a person who keeps her promises? You. Lei Ho's expression changed greatly. He suddenly stood up. However, his hands and feet were shackled. As soon as he moved, there was a rustling sound. These days, he had eaten very little. His entire body was weak. When he moved, he did not reach Xiao Ju. Instead, he fell to the ground. The young man sat on a chair and looked down at him with his head tilted. It was as if he was admiring his sorry state. After a while, he slowly said, I only said that I would consider it. As a prisoner, he had to have the self-awareness of a prisoner. Lei Ho finally realized that from the moment he stepped into the Liangzhou guards, he was destined to be a prisoner. He was no match for this man. When he was 16 years old, he could drown 60,000 people in Gua City. He could also kill Zhao Nua without batting an eyelid. His ruthlessness and methods were unparalleled. I beg you. He slowly knelt down and kowtowed to Xiao Ju. Let my wife and son go. The man looked at him for a moment. Then, he slowly said, Okay. Let me ask you again. Do you only communicate with the person who met you through letters? Yes, yes. Since he had already decided to surrender, his goal was only to ask Xiao Ju to let his wife and son go. Therefore, he told him everything, hoping that the man in front of him would be lenient. He said, We send a letter every month. The person who met me was in Shuajing. Then, he went to Jiang. That's all I know. If you want to find him, go to Jiang. You'll definitely find him. Jiang City. Xiao Ju muttered to himself and looked at him. Jiang City doesn't allow foreigners to stay for long. What identity did your person use to enter the city? I don't know. Lei Ho said, I only know that he lives in Jiang's Tsuiwei Pavilion. Tsuiwei Pavilion. Xiao Ju stood up and said, I understand. Xiao Huijin. Military Governor Xiao. Lei Ho stopped him and crawled 2 steps forward like a dog. He rushed in his direction and said, "I've already told you everything I know. Can you let go of my wife and son?" The handsome young man stopped at the door. He didn't turn around and said in a mocking tone, "There's no hurry. Maybe you'll remember something in a few days. It won't be too late to let them go then." He turned around and walked out. Chi Wu was waiting outside the door. When he saw him, Chi Wu said, "Young master, there's news from Wanning." Xiao Ju said, "Speak." "We've found Chai Anshi's whereabouts. Chai Anshi is now in Jiang." "Jiang?" Xiao Ju turned around. Chi Wu didn't know what happened in the dungeon. He hesitated and said, "Is there something wrong?" Fei Nu followed behind him and said with a serious expression, "The messenger Lei Ho mentioned is also in Jiang." "Young master, are you suspecting that?" Fei Nu was surprised. "The person who secretly met with Lei Ho is Chai Anshi?" "I can't be sure because I haven't seen him." But, Chi Wu couldn't help but ask, Jiang is a vassal state's territory. People outside the vassal state are not allowed to stay for long. Even if they want to stay for a short time, they need a pass. Even we can't go as we please. How did Chai Anshi get in? How could he stay in Jiang for so many days? Could it be a trap? Who knows? Lei Ho didn't say anything either. Fei Nu glanced at Xiao Ju's expression and asked carefully, "Young master, should we think of a way to go to Jiang first?" "That's easy for you to say." Chi Wu poured cold water on him. When old master was still alive, he passed by Jiang and stayed there for a few days. However, King Meng Ji refused to let old master's soldiers enter the city. He said that we need a pass. We have to go to the magistrate's office to get the pass and report it to the palace. We can't make it public. What should we do? There's no hurry. Xiao Ju played with the longevity lock in his hand. Let's wait for a few more days. Chi Wu and Fei Nu looked at each other. Fei Nu saw the longevity lock in his hand and remembered Lei Ho's words in the dungeon. He asked, "Young master, Lei Ho's wife and children are still being watched by our people. Should we continue or?" There were people in the capital who were watching Lei Ho's wife and children. Although they were locked up these days, they didn't do anything to harm them. News came from Jiang. Looking at Lei Ho's expression, it didn't seem like they could squeeze any more information out of him. How to deal with his wife and children was still a problem. Xiao Ju's gaze fell on the longevity lock in his hand. He laughed and casually threw it to Chi Wu. "Chi Wu, young master." He turned around and walked forward lazily. "Let it go." Chapter 123. This winter in the Yangzhou Guard was extremely cold. It snowed heavily for half of the month. Even if it wasn't snowing heavily, the sun rarely came out. There was a shortage of firewood and charcoal. Fortunately, after the new Yangzhou County Magistrate took office, he took the initiative to send some charcoal from the county government's warehouse to the guard office as a way to establish a good relationship with the right army's commander-in-chief. The new county magistrate was still very young and didn't have anyone to rely on at home. He looked gentle and weak, but he was very experienced and thoughtful. Lin Shuanghe was very satisfied with this new county magistrate. In the blink of an eye, 2 months had passed. The year was coming to an end. Soon, it would be the new year. After the new year, it would be another spring day. The new recruits of the Yangzhou Guard would no longer be called new recruits and spend the new year here. In the room, Xiao Ju was talking to Chi Wu and Fei Nu. "There's another letter from the vassal territory." Chi Wu took out a letter and handed it to Xiao Ju. "There's one every month. This is the second one." Other than the instructor, Chi Wu, and He Yen knew that Lei Ho had been captured and locked in the dungeon. The new recruits of the Yangzhou Guard didn't know. Thinking that Lei Ho had become a deserter, Xiao Ju ordered Lei Ho to continue communicating with the person hiding in Jiang. He lied that he had escaped from the Liangzhou guard and was hiding from the soldiers chasing after him. He also asked what he should do next. The person in Jiang was very cunning. He didn't directly tell Lei Ho what to do in the letter. He only told Lei Ho to hide well and that his master would send someone to pick him up. Xiao Ju took out the letter and read it quickly. Then, he handed it to Fei Nu. After Fei Nu and Qi Wu read it, their expressions turned ugly. The person in the letter said that since Rita Musi had been exposed, the Liangzhou guard's chess pieces were useless. He told Lei Ho to find a way to hide and wait for the storm to blow over before the people from Shuajing came to pick him up. After this letter, they should not continue to write to each other. In these troubled times, if they were to act rashly and alert the enemy and spoil the plans of their superiors, it would not be something that the two of them could bear. What should we do? Qi Wu said, does this person mean that he won't send any more letters in the future? Xiao Ju, Lei Ho is already useless. But Jiang. Fei Nu hesitated for a moment. Is the commander-in-chief planning to go to Jiang? Even if there wasn't a messenger, I would still make a trip there based on the fact that Chai Anshi is in Jiang. Xiao Ju placed the letter on the burning candle on the table. The flame licked the letter, and in a moment, it turned into ashes. Chai Anshi was Xiao Zhongwu's former general. In the Battle of Mingshui, Xiao Zhongwu and the tens of thousands of soldiers he brought with him were all killed, including his generals. At that time, Chai Anshi's corpse was not found on the battlefield. However, everyone thought that he was most likely dead. A few years had passed, and Xiao Ju had been sending people to secretly investigate Chai Anshi's whereabouts. Now, his efforts had paid off. Chai Anshi was not dead, and he had even gone to Jiang incognito. Jiang was the territory of King Mengji. If people from outside the Wei's territory wanted to enter the city, they had to obtain a pass from the government. Even if they obtained a pass, outsiders could not stay here for long. Chai Anshi had lived here for a long time, so it was no wonder that others could not find his whereabouts. But how do we go to Jiang? If we ask the government for a pass, Su Jingfu's people will be able to find out. Won't they be able to control our every move? Fei Nu asked. Xiao Ju turned around, thought for a moment, and said, do we use another method? Qi Wu, what method? Find someone who has a pass to go to Jiang and change their identity. This. Slave Fei was in a difficult position. When Meng Ji King was still alive, he was extremely strict on the way in and out. Even if there was a pass, there was also a record and a portrait of the person. Moreover, because it was very troublesome to enter the territory of the vassal state, the people of Dawei dealt with it by not going there if they could. Throughout the year, there were very few people who had a pass to go to Jiang. There were not many people in the first place, and the customs were very strict. It was not easy to ask someone to change their identity with Xiao Ju, even if they were not allowed to enter the territory again if they were found out. Let Wanning handle this, Xiao Ju said to Qi Wu, write a letter to Wanning immediately and tell her to prepare as soon as possible. Qi Wu. Yes. As they were talking, someone pushed open the door and entered. It was Lin Shuanghe. Qi Wu nodded at him. Young Master Lin. Lin Shuanghe also smiled at him. Fei Nu also tactfully left. Huijin, what have you been busy with these days? Lin Shuanghe waved his fan. It's almost spring now. Do you know how many times I've seen you? Are you bored? Xiao Ju said, when Qin Lisu returns to the capital, you can go with her. Forget it. Since I'm already here, why should I go back? He said, when are they leaving? In 2 days. After the incident with Musi, the Liangzhou guards were no longer safe. There might be changes in the future. It was not suitable for Chen Lisu and Song Tao Tao to continue staying here. Xiao Ju had already ordered people to leave for Shuo in a few days. The two children were naturally unwilling and argued for a long time. However, with Xiao Ju involved, there was no reason why it could not be done. No matter how dissatisfied they were, they could only accept Xiao Ju's arrangement. I won't say anything about Qing Lisu, but Song Tao Tao, that little girl, is actually willing to let go of He Yan? Lin Shuanghe said in disbelief. She almost grew up on He Yan. She's going to go back just like that? Why don't you ask her? Xiao Ju sat down on a chair and poured himself a cup of tea. He drank lazily. He had been busy for a long time, but he only had a short break. Qing Lisu sat on his soft couch and looked at him. It's fine if you ignore me. After all, we've known each other for so many years, so I won't argue with you. However, how can you ignore my Mimi? Although military matters are important, my Mimi is also important. Don't blame me for not warning you. If you continue like this, when Mimi is taken away by Chu Xilan, you won't have anyone to cry to. What does she have to do with me? Xiao Ju frowned impatiently and said, What's wrong with Chu Xilan? Lin Shuanghe rested his chin on the handle of his fan and said calmly, I don't know if it's a coincidence or not, but for the past month, I've always seen Mimi and Chu Xilan talking together. She's a girl and she's injured. She can't train every day and is bored. I don't know why Chu Xilan came to Liangzhou. It's already been 2 months and he hasn't mentioned when he's leaving. He's bored and Mimi's bored. When the two of them get together, they're already close. Anyway, Mimi used to call him Fourth Young Master Chu. 2 days ago, I heard her call Chu Xilan Brother Chu. If this continues, won't you panic? Xiao Ju was confused. Why should I panic? Why don't you think about it? If younger sister he is kidnapped by Chu Xilan and used by Chu Xilan, the Liang province guards will have one less peerless genius in both civil and military strategy. You are pushing away a capable general. Xiao Ju sneered, do you think there's no one in the Liangzhou guards? Anyway, I've never seen a girl like her before, Lin Shuanghe said, Chu Xilan is used to pleasing girls. Originally, you were born better than him and you're more capable than him. However, your personality is still more gentle and kind. Which girl wouldn't like to have such a good-looking rich young master accompanying her gently every day? Like? Xiao Ju's beautiful eyes narrowed and her voice was filled with mockery. You're only 16 years old, yet you know what it means to like. So what if I'm 16 years old? Lin Shuanghe said, in Shua capital, many girls at 16 years old are already married. So? Xiao Ju picked up her tea and took a sip. She said indifferently, at 16 years old, other than her father and brothers, how many men have she seen? Since she hasn't seen many men, how can she know what it means to like? Saying that she likes peonies after only seeing peonies is different from saying that she likes peonies after seeing hundreds of flowers. Liking when you have a choice is also different from liking when you don't have a choice. What you're saying is meaningless. Lin Shuanghe rolled his eyes. Most people in the world are normal people. Of course, they follow the rules of normal people. Normal people are like this. They get married at 16 and spend their lives together. It's not like they don't have a lifetime of happiness. There are even more unhappy people. Xiao Ju said, normal people don't have a choice, but I do. Lin Shuanghe was completely speechless. He said, okay, okay, okay. You have it, you have it, you have it. But according to what you said, the only girl you can find who's seen hundreds of flowers is Mimi He. Mimi He didn't just see hundreds of flowers in the Liang province guards. There are tens of thousands of men in the Liang province guards, and she's also seen tens of thousands of flowers. If she sees tens of thousands of flowers and likes you, that's great. But if she sees tens of thousands of flowers and likes Chu Xilan, Lin Shuanghe gloated, wouldn't that be a huge blow to you? You're thinking too much. Xiao Ju said, whoever she likes has nothing to do with me. However, Chu Xilan is Su Jingfu's son-in-law. She can like Chu Xilan. Xiao Ju's lips curved. As long as she's not afraid of death. Lin Shuanghe was stunned. Oh, right. I almost forgot. Chu Xilan is Su Pingting's man. When Lin Shuanghe and Xiao Zhu talked about Chu Xilan, He Yan had just arrived at Chu Xilan's door. Ying Xiang smiled and welcomed her in, saying, "Young Master He, you're here." Then, she looked behind her and said jokingly, "Miss Song didn't follow me today." Thank goodness. Song Tao Tao guarded Ying Xiang tightly. As soon as He Yan went to find Chu Zhao, Song Tao Tao would be alert and follow him. After all, Ying Xiang was beautiful and charming. She wasn't as cold and aloof as Shin Muxue. To men, she was more attractive. She's packing her things. He Yan smiled. In a few days, she'll be leaving the Liang province guards. She can't follow me around every day. Speaking of this, He Yan felt a headache coming on. When Song Tao Tao found out that she was going to return to Shuajing, she cried and threw a tantrum, unwilling to leave no matter what. She and Qing Lisu reached an unprecedented agreement and almost tore off the roof of the Liang province guards. In the end, Xiao Zhu had to personally come out and subdue the two children. Only then did she agree to follow Xiao Zhu back to the capital. That wasn't all, but Song Tao Tao even tried to take He Yan with her. "Whatever second young master Xiao promised you, my Song family will triple it. Don't stay in the Liang province guards." The little girl looked at her with disdain. "The Liang province guards is such a cold place. If you're not careful, you'll lose your life. I heard Qing Lisu say that if you want to make a name for yourself, why do you have to walk this path? You've risked your life here and haven't even been promoted. Too pitiful." He Yan thought, yes, too pitiful. "My Song family is different," Song Tao Tao said seriously. "Although my father can't call the wind and summon the rain in the capital, he can still help you a bit. You'll have a much better future in my Song family than in Liang province. As for the military registry, you don't have to worry. As long as I tell my father, he'll find a way to set you free." He Yan. No, I'm fine in Liang province." Song Tao Tao's gaze was like a knife. "Don't tell me you don't want to let go of that maid called Ying Xiang." The little girl was young, but she was quite shrewd. He Yan didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "That's not it. It's just that my status in the Liang province guards is special. If Miss Song wants me, you can go directly to Military Governor Xiao. If Military Governor Xiao is willing to let me go, of course I'll follow Miss Song back to the capital." Would Xiao Zhu let him go so easily? Of course not. The Liang province guards weren't the backup army of the capital's son-in-law. If she took the lead, what would the other recruits think? It was better to curry favor with a rich young lady than to fight to the death. If this continued, the Liang province guards wouldn't even need to be attacked by the enemy. Once the soldiers' morale dropped, they would be gone in 2 years. Xiao Zhu wouldn't let that happen. Bringing up Xiao Zhu was still quite shocking to the little girl. Song Tao Tao immediately gave up and no longer mentioned bringing He Yan back to the capital. She walked into the room and saw Chu Zhao feeding the birds. He Yan felt that Chu Xilan was a very interesting person. If he wasn't gardening, he was writing, and if he wasn't writing, he was feeding the birds. His life was like that of an old man in his 60s or 70s in the capital. However, he had stayed in the Liang province guards for 2 months. Since he was so carefree, wouldn't it be better to go to the capital and relax? Why come here to suffer? There wasn't even a lot of coal here. However, even so, He Yan was still willing to run over to Chu Xilan's room. There was no other reason. Chu Zhao was a very patient person. He Yan couldn't go to the practice field to train anyway. It was good to listen to Chu Zhao talk about the interesting things in the capital. In her previous life, she had been fighting outside. When she returned to the capital, He Rufei had replaced her. She didn't know much about the Shoa capital's officialdom. She didn't know much about her colleagues. In the past, it was fine. However, after doing a few things with Xiao Zhu, He Yan knew that if she really wanted to start over, she had to know the power structure of each party. At least she knew the general situation of the Crown Prince's faction, Prime Minister Su's faction, and Xiao Ju's faction. He Yan learned a lot from Chu Xiao. She didn't want to be too hostile towards Chu Xiao. Moreover, this person really didn't do anything to her in the beginning. Today, it was Chu Xiao who ordered Ying Xiang to come over and talk to He Yan. "Brother Chu," she said. Chu Xiao put the last bit of bird food into the bowl. The bird flapped its wings and let out a clear cry. This kind of cold weather was really not suitable for raising birds. Therefore, Chu Xiao placed all of his charcoal near the bird cage. He was also very considerate and gentle towards birds. "You're here." Chu Xiao smiled as he walked to the basin to wash his hands. "Brother Chu, why did you ask Ying Xiang to come find me today?" He Yan asked tentatively. Normally, He Yan was the one who took the initiative to talk to Chu Xiao. It was rare for Chu Xiao to take the initiative, so there must be something important. "It's nothing." Chu Xiao smiled as he invited He Yan to sit down. "I might be going back to the capital in a few days. Before I leave, I want to say goodbye to Brother He." He Yan was startled. "You're going back?" "That's right." Chu Xiao smiled. "I've already stayed in Liangzhou for 2 months. It's a long journey. By the time I get back, it will already be spring." He said, "I'm indebted to Brother He for taking care of me these past 2 months in Liangzhou. It was very interesting. Brother He is very considerate." "You're too kind." He Yan hurriedly said, "It's not me taking care of you. It's you taking care of me. The people who will come to pick me up will probably arrive in a few days." Chu Xiao smiled. "I don't think it will snow for the next few days. Why don't we set up a pavilion banquet on Baiyue Mountain and drink farewell wine with Brother He? The commander-in-chief doesn't allow us to go up the mountain without permission." He Yan was in a difficult position. "Brother Chu also knows that I can't hold my liquor well. If I get drunk, it will inevitably cause trouble." When Chu Xiao heard this, he smiled and shook his head. "It's fine. We won't go up the mountain. There's a pavilion at the foot of Baiyue Mountain. From there, you can overlook the Wulu River and see the best moonlight. It's fine at the foot of the mountain. As for wine, even if Brother He wants to drink, I don't have any. I'll use tea in place of wine. It's fine as long as you're sincere." Since he had already said it like this, He Yan didn't have any reason to decline. He straightforwardly replied, "Of course it's fine. Since Brother Chu is leaving, I naturally should accompany you. When will the pavilion banquet that Brother Chu mentioned be held?" "I'll make some preparations. Tonight will be fine." Chu Xiao smiled. "If it snows at night, there won't be a good moonlight tomorrow." He Yan said, "Tonight it is. Tonight, I'll definitely talk to Brother Chu all night long." She thought, Chu Xiao was about to leave. In the future, who would be able to explain to her the intricate and complicated relationships between the various officials in the capital? It would be better to take advantage of tonight to get as much information as possible so that it wouldn't be difficult to find such an opportunity in the future. Chu Xiao smiled. "Brother He is straightforward." "That's right." He Yan thought of something. "Brother Chu, why do you suddenly want to go back? Didn't you say before that you wanted to stay until the spring weather warmed up a bit before leaving? If you leave now, I'm afraid the journey will be cold." "I can't help it." Chu Xiao smiled somewhat helplessly. "It's my colleague, Hanlin Academy scholar Su Darren, who is getting married. I have to rush back to the capital to attend the wedding banquet." He Yan was holding the teacup on the table to warm her hands. When she heard this, she froze. She felt her palms become cold and her heart gradually sank. She almost couldn't control her expression. She stiffly pulled the corners of her mouth and asked, "Su Darren?" "Which Su Darren?" "His name is Su Zhiheng, the eldest son of the Crown Prince's grand tutor." Chu Xiao curiously said, "Haven't I told you about him?" This person is erudite and multi-talented. He's well-read and is very outstanding. The steaming hot tea suddenly froze into ice. He Yan's fingers curled slightly. Su Zhiheng, He Yan didn't know how she returned to the room. She also couldn't remember what Chu Xiao said after that. She only remembered that she tried her best not to reveal any of her emotions, so that others wouldn't notice any flaws. When she returned to the room, she almost couldn't stand properly. She held the head of the bed and slowly sat down on the bed. Chu Xiao's words just now echoed in her mind. Su Darren once had a wife. His eldest brother-in-law is the current General Fei Hong, He Rufei. He Rufei's cousin, the daughter of the He family, married Su Zhiheng for half a year. She lost her sight due to an illness. However, Su Darren didn't dislike his first wife because of this. He searched everywhere for famous doctors and was very considerate. He Yan asked, very considerate? That's right. At that time, the Su family's madam hoped that Su Darren would take a concubine or find another wife for him. Su Darren flatly refused. Unfortunately, Su Darren was unlucky. This spring, when she was alone in the manor, the servants didn't notice and she accidentally fell into the pond and drowned. Su Darren passed away almost a year ago. Su Darren originally told his relatives and friends that he wouldn't marry again in the future. However, he was still young. How could the Su family let him be a widower for the rest of his life? He was so affectionate that even his deceased wife's family couldn't stand it. They chose another young lady from the He family to be engaged to him. She was the daughter of the He family's second branch. She was 3 years younger than the original Su Darren. She was only 17 this year. The daughter of the He family's second branch was only 17 this year. He Yan closed his eyes. That was her biological younger sister. The He family had already planned this. Perhaps it was the result of their discussion with Su Zhiheng. He Yan had to die. However, once He Yan died, the relationship between the He family and the Su family would disappear. This was the result that neither family wanted to see. It was better to exchange one person for the other. He Yan's death for a new Su Darren. She held her head. She felt like her head was about to explode. Suddenly, someone's voice sounded. Big brother? What's wrong? He Yan looked up. It was Qing Li Su. She asked, why are you here? The young boy said, I knocked on the door for a long time. No one answered. I thought you weren't here, so I came to give you some snacks. He went forward with concern. Big brother, you don't look well. Is your wound hurting? Do you want me to call Uncle Lin? He Yan waved his hand and forced a smile. No need. I didn't sleep well last night. I'm a bit sleepy. Qing Li Su didn't doubt him. She nodded. Okay. She thought of something and curled her lips. Big brother, you seem to be very busy these days. I have to go back to Shuajing soon. I don't know when we'll meet again. A few days ago, I learned a puppet show with a stick from Coach Ma. How about I show you tonight? He Yan's mind was filled with Chu Xiao's words. How could she be in the mood to talk to Qing Li Su? Moreover, she still remembered her promise with Chu Xiao. She shook her head. Not tonight. I've already made plans with fourth young Master Chu. We're going to the foot of Mount Baiyue to see the moon. Why are two men looking at the moon? Qing Li Su said unhappily. Besides, how can the moon compare to a puppet show? Don't you see it every day? What's so strange about it? His ruckus actually pulled He Yan's attention back a little. She patiently explained, it's not just to see the moon. It's just that fourth young Master Chu will be leaving the Liang Province Guard in a few days, so before he leaves, he wants to drink with me. It's good that you have a good relationship with fourth young Master Chu. Don't forget about me. Qing Li Su didn't know about the undercurrent between Xiao Ju and Chu Xiao. To her, Chu Zhao was just a good-looking, good-tempered uncle who came from Shuajing with a gift from the emperor. She said, "After all, I've known you for a long time. It's reasonable for you to be more familiar with me. Big brother, you can't abandon me." She was just a little brat. He Yan could only coax her. "I know. Today I'll drink with him. Tomorrow I'll see your puppet show. What do you think?" Cheng Lisu was satisfied. She giggled. "That's more like it." Chapter 124. After lunch, the soldiers all looked for a warm place to rest for a while. Xiao Ju was talking to the deputy commander in the practice field. He was giving instructions for the next month's training. Lin Shuanghe walked over and waved his fan at him from a distance, indicating that he wanted to talk to him in private. Xiao Ju finished giving instructions and walked towards Lin Shuanghe. As he walked, he said impatiently, "Didn't you go to the medical center to help?" Lin Shuanghe had nothing to do all day. Recently, the weather had been cold. Shen Muxue took out a large pot of medicinal soup to warm the stomach and distributed it to everyone. Because there were not enough people, Lin Shuanghe volunteered to help. He had always been a gentleman and thought that the soldiers of the Yangzhou Guard did not bathe and smelled bad. After helping for 2 days, he gave up. "I was going to go, but I met someone on the way. A guest came to the Yangzhou Guard," he said. Xiao Ju asked, "Who?" Lin Shuanghe's face showed a meaningful smile, "Su Pingting's personal maid." Inside the room, a young maid stood in front of the door with a smile. She ordered the servant to open the boxes in the room one by one. She said, "These are the gifts that Miss personally chose for 4th young master." The current Prime Minister Su Jingfu had great power. Half of the officials in the court were his students. He had lived for most of his life and had a good reputation. The emperor trusted him. If there was anything he regretted, it would be that he did not have a son. Later, he found a famous doctor to treat him. When he was in his 50s, his wife finally gave birth to a daughter, Su Pingting. He only had this precious daughter when he was old. The Su family was almost completely obedient to Su Pingting. Even the princess was not as pampered as her. Su Pingting was 17 years old this year. She was also a charming little beauty, but her personality was particularly domineering, making it hard for others to resist. Chu Zhao was Su Jingfu's favorite student. He often went to eat with the Su family. After a while, he became familiar with Su Pingting. Little sister Mo Tai must be tired from the long journey. Ying Xiang smiled as she handed over a cup of tea and said, "Drink some tea to warm your body." Mo Tai glanced at Ying Xiang and said with a fake smile, "Forget it. This servant is not used to the crude tea of the Liang province guards." Ying Xiang was not annoyed. She still had a smile on her face as she took the tea away. Mo Tai looked at Ying Xiang's back and a trace of contempt flashed across her eyes. She cursed in her heart. With such a vixen by 4th young master Chu's side every day, who knew if she would use her seductive methods on his master? Although eldest Miss Su was young and beautiful, she was no match for this bitch when it came to pleasing others. It was not that Su Pingting had never thought of driving Ying Xiang away from Chu Zhao. Unfortunately, Chu Zhao, who had always been gentle, flatly refused to do so. In the end, Prime Minister Su had to personally step in and cover up the matter. Wasn't he just a servant? Was there a need to protect him like this? Mo Tai was dissatisfied, but she could not vent it on Chu Zhao. She looked around Chu Zhao's room. After a while, she shook her head and said, "The place where 4th young master lives is really too shabby. This servant has only stayed here for a short while, but my hands and feet feel cold. There isn't even a charcoal fire here. It seems that 4th young master has suffered these past 2 months." "It's no problem," Chu Zhao replied gently, "the new recruits here are all like this." "How can they compare to you?" Mo Tai said, "You can't compare yourself to that lowly bitch." A trace of coldness flashed through Chu Zhao's eyes. When he raised his head again, his expression was gentle again. He asked, "Miss Mo Tai, have you come here for something?" "It's nothing," Mo Tai said with a smile, "it's just that Miss hasn't seen fourth young master for a long time and misses him. She heard that Liang province is extremely cold in winter and ordered this servant to bring some warm clothing to fourth young master with the carriages." She bent down and took out a fur coat from the chest. She carried it to Chu Zhao and said, "Miss personally ordered people to buy this from merchants. It can be worn to keep out the cold. Fourth young master, do you want to try it?" The fur of the fur coat was smooth and clean, soft and light. It was obvious that it was expensive. Chu Zhao stood up and put on the fur coat. He smiled and thanked her, "It's very warm. Please thank eldest miss for me." Mo Tai covered her mouth and smiled, "This servant cannot do it for you. If you want to thank her, fourth young master should personally say it to eldest Mississippi." She seemed to have thought of something and asked Chu Zhao, "When does fourth young master plan on returning to Shua capital?" "It's in these 2 days. This servant thinks that Liang province is not a place for people to stay. If eldest miss was here, she would definitely feel sorry for fourth young master. How about you set out tomorrow? The earlier you set out, the earlier you can return to Shua capital, and the earlier you can see eldest Mississippi." She smiled slightly. Before this servant left, master even mentioned fourth young master to eldest Mississippi. Although she was probing, her tone was unquestionable. She had already made her decision. She did not allow Chu Zhao to refute. Chu Zhao paused for a moment, then raised his head and smiled, "Okay, we'll set out tomorrow. I also miss teacher." "That's great." Mo Tai's face suddenly bloomed like a flower. She urged the servant to take out the things in the box. "This box is full of winter clothes. This servant will take them out for you first. After I'm done, I'll help you pack your luggage for tomorrow's departure." She said, "I hope fourth young master won't blame this servant for being nosy." "How could I?" Chu Zhao smiled, "I can't thank you enough." Ying Xiang stood behind the curtain and looked at the arrogant Mo Tai in the room. She lowered her gaze and stood quietly for a moment before walking away. It was a winter evening and the sky turned dark very early. The lights in the room were lit up. Lin Shuanghe lay on the bed and spat out the melon seed in his mouth. "What's wrong with Su Pingting's maid? She talked to Chu Zhao from day to night and didn't let him leave. Those who don't know would think that she's the real eldest young Miss Su. Isn't it too obvious that she's announcing her ownership? Right now, I feel that Chu Xilan is a bit pitiful." Xiao Ju was sitting at the table and reading military documents. When she heard this, she said, "If he's pitiful, you can go and rescue him. Then forget it." Lin Shuanghe sat up and put his hands behind his head. "Who's to blame? It's all Chu Xilan's fault. Who told him to be good-looking and gentle? A man like that would be fought over in the capital. He even tried to curry favor with Su Jingfu. It's expected that eldest young Miss Su would like him." Xiao Ju smiled, "If he can really become the son-in-law of the Su family, then that's his ability." "That's true." Lin Shuanghe deeply agreed with Xiao Ju's words. He was originally ostracized and bullied in Count Shijin's residence. If it wasn't for Su Jingfu, how could he be registered under Di Mother's name? If he really marries the eldest young miss of the Su family, Lin Shuanghe said, Chu Xilan will be in charge of Count Shijin's residence in the future. Everyone said that women fawned over those in power and that if they found a good husband, they would be able to lean against a big tree and enjoy the shade. Who knew if men were different? When there were benefits in front of them, all of their choices were for the sake of living a better life. Whether they liked someone or not, whether they were willing or not, whether they were sincere or not, none of that mattered. It wasn't clear whether it was Su Pingting's sorrow or Chu Xilan's. I think that maid was lying when she said she would take care of him. She was really monitoring him. Lin Shuanghe spread out his hands. Chu Xilan won't be able to sleep tonight. Chu Xilan. Qing Lisu's head poked in through the window. What's wrong with him? Didn't he go to see the moon with my eldest brother tonight? What do you mean see the moon? Lin Shuanghe asked. We went to the foot of Mount Baiyue to see the moon. I originally wanted to find my eldest brother to watch the puppet show I just learned, but my eldest brother said that he would go see the moon with fourth young Master Chu tonight, so I could only reschedule it to tomorrow. Qing Lisu looked at Lin Shuanghe, then at Xiao Ju. Uncle, what did you mean by what you said just now? Xiao Ju pushed his head back out of the window and closed it. Go back to sleep. Qing Lisu smashed the window outside to no avail. After a while, he could only leave. After he left, Lin Shuanghe rubbed his chin and asked, my younger sister he and Chu Xilan are going to see the moon tonight? Their relationship is developing so quickly. Xiao Ju continued to read the military documents, too lazy to pay attention to him. No, Lin Shuanghe crawled up from the bed, I have to go take a look. He walked directly to the door between the two rooms, knocked on the door and said, Brother He? Brother He. Brother He, are you there? Let me know if you are. He put his ear to the other side of the door, but it was quiet inside. There was no sound. Lin Shuanghe knocked a few more times, but there was still no response. He took 2 steps back and said to himself, my younger sister he doesn't know that Su Pingting's people are here, so she went to see the moon by herself, right? Huaijin. He shouted. Xiao Ju's ears hurt from his shout. He said impatiently, what? My younger sister he might have gone to see the moon by herself. Lin Shuanghe walked in front of him, go and look for her. I'm not going, Xiao Ju said indifferently, if you want to go, you go. I want to go, but Mount Baiyue is so big and I don't know the way. What if it's like what happened with Raidamuzi, and there are bad people on the mountain? You have martial arts, so you can protect yourself. If I go, I can only lie down and let them kill me. Won't you regret it if I die? Xiao Ju said, no, I won't. Why are you like this? Lin Shuanghe sat on his desk, blocking Junwen. He tried his best to persuade him, look at my younger sister she's so pitiful. Chu Xiao doesn't know that she's a girl, so he's gentle to everyone. But this is the first time younger sister he has met such a gentle person. Girls are very sensitive and are easily moved. But her identity can't be exposed, so she can only hide this love in her heart. Her sweetheart asked her to see the moon, so she must be very happy. But she doesn't know that her sweetheart is already someone else's son-in-law. Now she's alone on the mountain, so she must be very cold and sad. Can't you go and see her? Comfort her. Xiao Ju was puzzled by his idea, she likes Chu Xilan, and I'm going to comfort her. What kind of logic is that? Now is a good time for you. Lin Shuanghe encouraged him, now is the best time to take advantage of her. Xiao Ju sneered, then I won't go. Okay, Lin Shuanghe said, let's not talk about feelings. She's your soldier, and you're her superior. Younger sister he helped you protect the Liangzhou guards a while ago, so you should care about your subordinates. I'm her superior, not her father, Xiao Ju said coldly, besides, she has legs. If she can't wait for him, she'll come back. Lin Shuanghe was silent for a moment, then asked him, do you think she's the kind of person who will give up if she can't wait? Xiao Ju's hand that was holding the pen paused. The image of the youth running with a sandbag on his back in the martial arts arena appeared in his mind. He Yan wasn't the kind of person who gave up easily. Sometimes she was clever and cunning, but sometimes she was stubborn and persistent. It was hard to say whether she was stubborn or stupid, but Lin Shuanghe was right. With her personality, there was an 80 to 90% chance that she would wait for him on the mountain for the entire night. She was crazy. Seeing that Xiao Ju's attitude had softened, Lin Shuanghe immediately added fuel to the fire. Think about it, she's only 16 years old. It's already not easy for a little girl like her to get to where she is now in the Liangzhou guards. Now that Chu Xilan gave her such a blow, she's too pitiful. Just treat it as a good thing, go up the mountain, and bring her back. She'll be grateful to you, and she'll have to be more sincere when she works for you in the future. Seeing that Xiaoju didn't move, Lin Shuanghe added fuel to the fire. When Madame Xiao was alive, she was the most benevolent and soft-hearted person. If she saw little sister she'd definitely help. Shut up. Xiaoju couldn't take it anymore. He grabbed the cloak beside him, stood up, and walked out the door. I'll go. Lin Shuanghe looked at his back, extremely satisfied. Now that's a real man. At the foot of Mount Baiyue, there was a huge rock. The huge rock was flat and extended, and it looked like a stone platform. Walking down the stone platform, one could hear the sound of waves at the end. Looking down, one could see the majestic river below. Looking up, one could see the bright moon thousands of li away, illuminating the mountains and rivers. He Yen sat down at the end of the shore too. The sound of water splashing against the rocks in the distance. It was as if the deep ancient sound came from a distant time and space, distant and drawn out. She had arranged to meet with Chu Xiao at 9 o'clock, but she didn't know what time it was. There was still no sign of him. She did find the pavilion that Chu Xiao mentioned, but there were no dishes or snacks in the pavilion, so she didn't know what was going on. Perhaps she should go down and look for Chu Xiao, but once she sat down here, she didn't want to get up again. The forest was covered in snow, and the vast expanse of whiteness covered the mountains. The moonlight shone on the river, clear and carefree. This was an extremely beautiful moonlight, and also an extremely beautiful snow. Yen felt tired. Hugging her knees, she sat and looked at the end of the river. She liked the night more than the day, and she liked the moon more than the sun. This was because when she was Rufei, the mask never left her body. However, the mask was stuffy and heavy, and she was naughty. She would always secretly take off the mask in the middle of the night for a stick of incense to burn. No one could see her true appearance under the mask, except for the moon outside the window. She stretched out her hand, trying to catch the moonlight hanging in the distant mountains and rivers. The moonlight gently fell on her hand, as if it would stay for her forever. What are you doing? Someone's voice came from behind her. Yen turned around and saw a young man wearing a fox fur coat and embroidered clothes coming from the depths of the night. He was very tall, and he looked cold and handsome. It was Xiaoju. Yen was startled and subconsciously looked behind him. Xiaoju saw her and sneered, "Chu Xilan is not coming." Why? Yen asked. Xiaoju looked at her and said, "Someone from the capital is here. He has something to do and can't leave. He asked me to pass on the message." Yen nodded and looked at him in surprise. The governor is actually passing on a message for fourth young master Chu. Xiaoju and Chu Xiao were like fire and water. It was already incredible that Chu Xiao asked Xiaoju to pass on a message. It was even more shocking that Xiaoju actually listened to him and came here to find her. You still care about this? It seems like you're not very sad. He said and sat down on the other side of the huge rock. The winter night wind blew and it was extremely cold. Yen asked, "Why should I be sad?" As soon as she finished speaking, she sneezed. Although it was winter clothing, it was still unbearably cold to come out at night to be blown by the wind. She sat stiffly, her face pale from the cold, like a piece of green jade, with a kind of fragility. Xiaoju was silent for a moment. The next moment, she stood up. Just as Yen was about to raise her head, a fox fur coat covered her head, causing her vision to darken. When she came out of the fox fur coat, Xiaoju had already returned to her original position and sat down. The fur coat was slightly warm and blocked the wind and snow. Yen was stunned for a long time before she said, "Thank you." Xiaoju turned her head and glanced at her. The young girl's hair was tied up and she was wearing his black fur coat. Her shoulders were very narrow and she looked very frail. She used to be noisy and chatty all day long and only felt that it was a headache. However, when she was quiet, it was as if she had turned into another person. It made people feel uncomfortable. Xiaoju lowered her eyes and looked at her. After a while, she smiled. You look so bitter and resentful. It's really ugly. She paused and said, You can't bear to leave Chu's island. What? He Yan was confused. I didn't see you this depressed even when you were about to die, she said lazily. It seems like you like him very much. He Yan didn't understand what she was saying. He hasn't left yet and you're already so depressed. What will you do when he leaves tomorrow? Xiaoju looked at the river in the distance. Tomorrow? He Yan was shocked. So soon? She remembered that Chu Xiao told her that it would be one of these days. He didn't say that it would be tomorrow. Xiaoju looked at her with a half-smile. Are you anxious? No, He Yan said. I'm just a little surprised. She thought of something and said sadly, well, he has to make it in time for Su. Master Su's wedding. He has to leave as soon as possible. He Yan asked Xiaoju, do you know the young master of the Su family in Beijing? Xiaoju said, I've heard of him. Su Zhiheng is getting married. Fourth young master Chu rushed back just to make it in time for his wedding. He Yan's voice was dry. The one getting married is Su Zhiheng, not Chu Xilan. Xiaoju frowned. Look at how useless you are now. You still want to join the Nine Flags Battalion? He Yan forced a smile. Just as she was about to speak, Xiaoju waved her sleeve and threw something into her arms. He Yan looked down. It was a stick of tanghulu. It had been outside for a long time and was as cold as ice. It was bright red in the snow. Where did you get this? It's Song Taodao's. Xiaoju said. I just took a stick of it. He didn't know how to coax a girl. Before he left, he asked Lin Shuanghe. Lin Shuanghe replied, if it were someone else, they would have to spend a lot of effort to coax a sad girl. They would have to take her to see the lanterns, the flowers, the stars, and buy jade, pearls, and gold hairpins. But it's different for you. All you have to do is sit there and use your face. Xiaoju was speechless. When she passed by Shenmushua's room, she saw the tanghulu that Song Tao Tao had asked someone to buy for her by the window. She casually took a stick of it. The last time she saw her eating it, she was very happy. He Yan picked up the tanghulu, removed the rice cake wrapper, and licked it. The tanghulu was cold and a little sweetness spread along the tip of her tongue. It was so sweet that it made her heart feel bitter. She suddenly remembered the words she said to Chu Zhao. She asked Chu Zhao, what's the name of the new young mistress Su? Chu Zhao replied, He Xining. She's the second daughter of the He family's second branch. She's a cousin of the previous young mistress He. I've met her once. She's innocent and gentle. She's a good match for young mistress Su. He Xining. He Yan muttered. Do you know the name of the previous young mistress Su? Chu Zhao was stunned. He hesitated for a moment and shook his head. The previous young mistress Su lived in seclusion. She wasn't in Shuajing before. I've never seen her before. I don't know her name either. She didn't even leave a name. The world remembered General Fei Hong, He Rufei, Su Zhiheng, and even Su Zhiheng's new wife. However, no one remembered He Yan. She thought that after so long, she would know Su Zhiheng's true colors and would no longer feel heartache. However, the moment she heard that he was going to marry a new wife, she still felt a strange pain. It was as if the persistence and trust from many years ago had collapsed overnight. She didn't even bother to leave behind a lie. All that was left was her stupidity and unwillingness. She raised her head and looked at the moon. The gentle moonlight spread over the barren mountains and rivers, over the snowy forest, over her desolate and lonely years, and over her eyes under the mask. The moon knew her secret, but the moon couldn't speak. Do you know, she opened her mouth, her voice soft. What's the name of Su Zhiheng's new wife? Xiaoju lazily said, how would I know? He Yan laughed self-deprecatingly and asked again, "Then do you know what the name of the previous young Mistress Su was?" The waves of the river slapped against the reefs, as if they had been separated by a long time. He glanced at He Yan indifferently. His eyebrows were unbelievably handsome under the moonlight. A trace of mockery appeared in his limpid eyes. He said indifferently, "Why? Do you want to be young Mistress Su just because they have the same name?" He Yan was stunned. Do you know her name?" Her heart began to beat wildly. He Yan. The waves fell on the reefs and were broken into tiny droplets of water that merged into the river. It was impossible to tell where the waves came from. However, He Yan's name was remembered. He Yan suddenly raised her head and looked at him. "Do you know, have you seen young Mistress Su?" She said in her heart that it was impossible. She and Xiao Zhu were schoolmates for less than a year before they went their separate ways. When she returned to Shuajing, she became Lady He and was no longer He Rufei. She was quickly engaged and didn't even leave the house a few times, let alone a man. When she married into the Su family, she became blind not long after her marriage. She stayed in the house all day and was almost isolated from the world. How could Xiao Zhu have seen her? Unless I have. The young man sat lazily. His eyebrows were charming, and the mountains and rivers were not as bright as the light in his eyes. For a moment, his voice overlapped with the voice of a certain night. It was also a night like this, with mountains like this. The rain continued to fall, and her world was dark and gloomy. It was only a hair's breadth away from despair. Xiao Zhu said, "She owes me a candy." Chapter 125. The Mid-Autumn Festival in the 62nd year of Qingyuan was the coldest mid-autumn festival in Dawei. It had been raining since the morning and the clouds were heavy. Looking at the situation, it seemed like it would rain for an entire day. Mount Lianxue was a chaotic mountain with many peaks. Because of the rain, the fog was thick and the mountain path was difficult to travel on. The carriage slowly passed on the mountain path. Even on such a difficult mountain path, Mount Lianxue was bustling all year round. This was because there was a spiritual temple on the mountain called Yuhua. Yuhua Temple was very popular. It was said that anyone who worshipped Buddha there could have their wishes fulfilled. This was an exaggeration, but Yuhua Temple had existed for hundreds of years. It was a true ancient temple. The officials and nobles of Shuo City were all willing to come here to pray during festivals to pray for their families to be safe and happy. The curtain of the carriage was lifted. Xiao family's eldest young mistress, Bai Rongwei, looked outside and said softly, "Soon, we will reach Yuhua Temple in less than half an hour. Are you hungry?" Xiao Jing asked warmly beside her. Bai Rongwei shook her head and looked at the carriage behind her. She was a little worried. Huaijin, Xiao Jing sighed softly and didn't say anything. Xiao family knew that second young master Xiao didn't like the Mid-Autumn Festival. He even hated it. Xiao Zhongwu died on the battlefield and it was the Mid-Autumn Festival soon. If he was still alive, he would have come back to spend the Mid-Autumn Festival with his family. Unfortunately, he died in the Battle of Mingshui before the Mid-Autumn Festival arrived. Xiao family's Mid-Autumn Festival banquet was prepared halfway and stopped abruptly. It didn't continue. Ever since the Xiao family couple passed away, Xiao Zhu wasn't in Shuojing every Mid-Autumn Festival. This year was his first Mid-Autumn Festival in Shuojing since he took over the Southern Prefecture Army. Xiao family also followed the rules when Madame Xiao was still alive. They burned incense and prayed at Mount Lianshue's Yuhua Temple during the Mid-Autumn Festival. However, they didn't expect the weather to be so bad today. Not only was there no sun, but the rain didn't stop. Just as Bai Rongwei had said, in less than half an hour, they could see the door of Yuhua Temple. A monk wearing a bamboo hat was sweeping the fallen leaves on the ground. When he saw the Xiao family's carriage arrive, he put down the broom in his hand and welcomed them into the temple. Because of the rain today, the mountain path was difficult to travel on. In the past, at this time of the year, Yuhua Temple would have been bustling with activity. However, today, other than the carriage of the Shao family, there was only one other carriage parked outside the mountain gate. It was unknown which family it belonged to. Xiao Ju followed them inside. The sky was dark. Although it was afternoon, it looked as if it was already evening. They followed the monks in the temple to have a vegetarian meal first, and then went to the Buddha hall to burn incense and pray for blessings. Bai Rongwei and Xiao Ju went in first. When it was Xiao Ju's turn, the monk in green reached out his hand to stop him. He said, "Almsgiver, you cannot go in." Bai Rongwei and Xiao Jing turned around. Bai Rongwei asked, "Why?" "This is my younger brother. We went up the mountain to pray for blessings together." The monk in green put his palms together and bowed to her. He then turned to Xiao Ju, lowered his head and said, "Benefactor, you have killed too many people. The Buddhist temple is a peaceful place, not a place for those whose hearts are stained with blood." They were startled. He had killed too many people. In the Battle of Guo City's Long Valley, 60,000 people were drowned. Wasn't that because he had killed too many people? Over the years, countless people from the southern barbarians had died at his hands. His heart was indeed stained with blood. "Master," Bai Rongwei was anxious. "Buddha saves all living beings. How can there be a distinction between high and low? Although his hands are stained with blood, he has saved many lives." Xiao Jing frowned. "Master, your words are too one-sided." The monk in green lowered his eyes and said nothing. "Master, please be tolerant," Bai Rongwei pleaded. "Our Shao family is willing to pay more incense, as long as my brother can also enter the Buddha hall to pray." "There's no need." Someone's voice interrupted her. The young man in the brocade robe looked up and his gaze fell on the Buddha hall. In the Buddha hall, a golden Buddha statue sat cross-legged. There was a fierce Vajra with angry eyes, and a serene Vairocana. From top to bottom, from far to near, they looked down at him with pity. The Sanskrit Niao Niao. The sea of bitterness was boundless, and Buddha could not be saved. He should have expected this ending. "He can't save me." Xiao Ju raised the corner of her mouth. "I don't want to look back." It was not impossible to sink into oblivion like this. He turned and walked out. "I'll wait for you outside." Bai Rongwei and Xiao Jing's shouts came from behind him. He frowned impatiently and turned to leave everything behind. He didn't know that after he left, the monk in green chanted the name of Buddha and whispered, "It may not be fated." Because it was raining, the road down the mountain was more slippery than the road up the mountain. The sky was dark, and it would be inappropriate to go down the mountain after praying. Tonight, they could only stay at Yuhua Temple. Sleeping outside on the Mid-Autumn Festival was also a helpless matter. The monk arranged a room for Bai Rongwei and the others and left. Bai Rongwei sighed. On the table was a moon ball specially made by Yuhua Temple. She said to Xiao Jing, "Go and call Huaijin. Let's reluctantly spend the Mid-Autumn Festival here." Xiao Jing went to the next room and knocked on the door. For a long time, no one answered. He pushed the door and entered. The room was empty. Xiao Ju was not in the room. He looked at the courtyard of the temple. The rain washed the stone slabs clean. It was raining. Where did Xiao Ju go? In the backyard of Yuhua Temple, there was an ancient tree. Yuhua Temple had been here since it was built. No one knew how many hundreds of years it had lived. The ancient tree had a spirit. Its branches and leaves were luxuriant. The believers who came to offer incense called it the immortal tree. The immortal tree was hung with red silk ribbons. Some prayed for good grades, and some prayed for good weather. The red silk covered the branches. When it rained, there was no shelter outside. The hanging prayer strips were wet and stuck to the branches as if they were covered with a layer of red silk. The young man holding the umbrella stopped. A piece of red cloth fell on the ground. There was a yellow tassel on it. Probably the rain was too heavy and the red silk was blown down. Xiaoju paused and bent down to pick up the red silk. Each piece of red silk was written with the wish of the person who hung it. He looked down. The one on the left was wet from the rain. The ink was so thick that he could not see its original appearance. The one on the right was still clear. The words were crooked, like the scribbles of a 3-year-old child. The word, look, was written on it. Look? Look at what? It was strange. He was tall. He tied the strange red silk back to the tree. He deliberately found a place where the leaves were the most luxuriant. This way, it would not be soaked easily by the rain. After doing all this, he put the umbrella aside again. The sachet on his waist was exposed because of his movements. He was stunned. The sachet was very old. It was a dark green bag with a black python embroidered on it with gold thread. It was majestic, flexible, and exquisite. However, too much time had passed. The stitches were worn out and the python pattern was not as vivid as before. The sachet was empty, as if there was nothing inside. He stroked the sachet with his fingertips. Something sank in his eyes. The youths in the Xianchang gymnasium all knew that Xiaoju had a sachet with him since he was young. The more mischievous ones like Lin Shuanghe had always been curious about what kind of treasure was inside. Later, when he had the opportunity to open it, he found that it was a bag full of osmanthus candy. At that time, second young Master Xiao was ridiculed. He liked to eat sweet things so much that he even carried them with him to school. Little did he know that this was made for him by Madame Xiao when she was alive. After Madame Xiao died, he still carried this sachet. However, there was no longer any candy inside. There was only one, old, blackened, and inedible osmanthus candy. Xiaoju left the mountain at the age of 15 and entered the Xianchang gymnasium. He had learned everything he needed to learn in the early years of the mountain. Therefore, he only needed to see it once to remember the lessons taught by his teacher. He slept in between classes all day long. Often, he easily got first place. His teacher liked him, and his classmates envied him. In the eyes of outsiders, it was unknown how much good karma he had accumulated in his previous life to be able to reincarnate like this. However, Xiao Zhongwu was extremely strict with him. He was born lazy. Originally, when he was on the mountain, other than his teacher, there was no one to discipline him. Xiao Zhongwu also could not see him. After he left the mountain, his classmates often invited him to the banquet today and the pear garden tomorrow. They were all 14 or 15 years old youths, so there was no reason for him not to go. Although most of the time, he just sat lazily at the side and watched, or simply slept. However, in Xiao Zhongwu's eyes, he felt that this child was willing to degenerate and idle around. Xiao Zhongwu reprimanded him and used the family law to confiscate his monthly allowance. He punished him to copy books and practice martial arts. He did everything he was told. However, as a youth, arrogance and unruliness were engraved in his bones. How could he really accept it? The more he calmly accepted his punishment, the angrier Xiao Zhongwu became. Later on, he quarreled with Xiao Zhongwu. Xiaoju raised his eyebrows. What you wanted me to do, I did it. Since you only want to see the results are already out. Father, what are you feeling awkward about? The corner of the youth's mouth curved into a mocking smile. In an instant, Xiao Zhongwu's hand that was holding the whip stopped. Xiaoju chuckled and turned to leave. That was the last time he saw Xiao Zhongwu alive. The next day, Xiao Zhongwu led the troops to the southern barbarians. Not long after, he died in the Battle of Mingshui. When the news of the coffin being transported back to the capital, Madame Xiao was in the kitchen making osmanthus candy for Xiaoju. When she heard the news, a plate of osmanthus candy was knocked over and fell to the ground, covered in dust. The trusted aide who was lucky enough to survive knelt in front of Madame Xiao and cried. We originally planned to go to Mingshui 2 days earlier, but the general said that Mingshui is rich in ironware. He wanted to make a sword for second young master. Before leaving, he argued with second young master and hurt second young master's feelings. He hoped that this sword would let second young master understand his painstaking efforts. I didn't expect. Madame Zhao's heart-wrenching cries could be heard in the house. She rushed forward and hit Xiao Ju. She cried and scolded, "Why are you angry with him? Why? If you weren't angry with him, he wouldn't have stayed in Mingshui. He wouldn't have been ambushed and he wouldn't have died." He endured this terrible accusation and let the woman's soft fists fall on his body. He didn't say a word. How could it be? His father, that resolute and strict man, didn't show any mercy when he waved the whip. How could a man who left his child in a strange mountain and didn't come back once a year die? He was cold and ruthless, righteous. How could he die? The terrible accusation continued. It's you who killed him. It's you who killed your father. He couldn't bear it and pushed his mother away. I didn't. It's not me. The woman was pushed away by him and looked at him blankly. Unable to bear her desperate look, Xiao Ju turned and ran out. He didn't know where he should go, nor did he know who he should talk to. It had only been a year since he went down the mountain and returned to Shuajing. In a year, he didn't even know everyone in Xiao Mansion. He didn't even learn how to get along with his family. It was already like this. When people are in extreme pain, they don't cry. He didn't feel the pain now, he was just confused. It was as if he had just heard an impossible joke and did not know how to react. He just felt that his steps were heavy and he didn't dare to go forward. He couldn't face his mother's desperate and mournful eyes. Many years later, Xiao Ju would think that if he hadn't been so timid and went back to the house, everything that happened later wouldn't have happened. But there were no ifs. When he went back, it was already night time. Xiao Jing and Bai Rongwei had already come back. Their eyes were red and swollen, as if they had cried. Xiao Jing, who was always weak and polite, rushed up and punched him. She grabbed his collar and shouted with red eyes, "Where did you go? Why weren't you in the mansion? Why weren't you with mother?" He suddenly felt a wave of disgust and self-mockery. He pulled the corner of his mouth. "You and I are both sons. Why don't you ask yourself?" "You." Huaijin, Bai Rongwei sobbed. "Mother is gone." His smile froze. "Mother is gone." Xiao Jing let go and took 2 steps back. She covered her face and sobbed. Madame Zhao's life was as weak as a flower that had never experienced wind and rain. When Xiao Zhongwu was alive, she was dissatisfied with him and quarreled with him every few days. They were like a resentful couple. Xiao Zhongwu died, and the flower withered. Without any nutrients, it followed him. She left so decisively that she didn't even think about what her 2 sons would do if they stayed in Shuajing. Xiao family. The moment she lost Xiao Zhongwu, her life no longer had any meaning. So she used a piece of white silk to end her life. Before she died, the last words she said to Xiao Ju were, "You killed him. You killed your father." These words would become an eternal nightmare for Xiao Ju. Years later, he would often wake up in the middle of the night, unable to sleep. He would never be able to get rid of it. Xiao Zhongwu and Madame Xiao were buried together. A few days ago, in preparation for the Mid-Autumn Festival, the lanterns and canvases were removed and replaced with white lanterns. Xiao Zhongwu's death brought more than just a blow to the Xiao family. Xiao Jing had suffered many open and covert attacks in the imperial court, so Xiao Ju had to bear the same burden behind his back. The Nanfu soldiers, the Xiao family, and the unwarranted blame for the Battle of Mingshui. He still didn't shed a single tear. He did things numbly and made arrangements. The time he could sleep was getting shorter and shorter. The days he returned to the Fu were getting later and later. That night, Xiaoju returned to the Fu late. After Xiao Zhongwu's death, most of the servants in the Fu were dismissed. Other than his personal bodyguards, he didn't need any servants. He felt hungry and realized that he hadn't eaten for a whole day. It was too late. There was no need to trouble Bai Rongwei. Xiaoju went to the kitchen to see if there was any leftover food. The stove was cold and there wasn't much food in the kitchen. Everyone was busy these days and didn't have the heart to eat. He found 2 steamed buns and a bowl of pickled vegetables. The light was so weak that it looked like it was going to go out. There were no stools in the kitchen. The youth was very tired. He found a corner by the wall and sat down. Suddenly, he saw an osmanthus candy at the end of the long table, in the corner of the wall. When the news of Xiao Zhongwu's death came, Madame Xiao was making osmanthus candy for Xiaoju. When she heard the news, the plate of osmanthus candy was knocked over. Later, the servants cleaned it up and there was nothing left. There was one that had slipped through the net. It was lying quietly in the corner, covered in dust. He crawled over and carefully picked up the osmanthus candy. He brushed the dust off it. The candy smelled faintly of osmanthus. It was as sweet as always. Madame Xiao always made osmanthus candy very sweet. It was so sweet that it hurt people. He didn't eat sweet things. But this was the last piece of candy he got in the human world. There was still candy paper left in the sachet. He wrapped the candy and put it back in the sachet. He picked up the bowl and the steamed bun. Second young Master Xiao had always been noble. He was particular about cleanliness. But now, he didn't care about his manners and sat down to eat. He hadn't changed his clothes for 2 days. His stomach hadn't eaten a single grain of rice. He no longer looked as beautiful and charming as he did in the past. The youth leaned against the wall and sat with his head raised. He slowly chewed on the steamed bun. As he ate, he laughed at himself. There seemed to be a bright light in his eyes, like the embers of the stars in the long night. It disappeared quickly. Time flew, leaving no trace. The past seemed to be a memory from his previous life. Those complicated emotions intertwined and finally turned into a nonchalant smile. It wasn't a hurdle that couldn't be crossed. He looked at the sachet in his hand in a daze. He didn't know what to think. After a while, he let go and continued to walk forward. Young master. Fei Nu came from behind. He took the umbrella and held it for Xiaoju. He asked, "Are we going back to the temple now?" "Let's go." Xiaoju said, "Let's get some fresh air." The last trace of light disappeared. Mount Lianxue was completely dark. Thick fog filled the air. It was like an illusion in the mountains. Almost no one would leave on a night like this. The rain fell along the umbrella. It wasn't heavy, but it was dense. It was like a layer of cold gauze, covering the mountains. "I don't know when this rain will stop," Fei Nu murmured. Most of the mid-autumn nights were sunny. It was rare to see a night like this. Xiaoju looked up. The night was dark and he couldn't see the end. He said, "There is no moon tonight. Without the moon, people wouldn't be round." The mountain forest road was muddy. Other than the sound of the rain, nothing could be heard. The further they walked, the more lush the trees were. They couldn't see clearly. Suddenly, there was a rustling sound in front of them. Fei Nu paused and reminded, "Young master." Xiaoju shook his head, indicating that he had heard it. It was so late and it was raining. Who would be here? Fei Nu poked the lantern in his hand forward. The rain was heavy. There was a figure standing under a tree. At first, he could only see a blurry shadow. It was probably a woman. He didn't know what she was doing. He took 2 steps forward and looked again. He saw that the woman was standing on a rock. Her hands were tugging at something long, and she was pulling it down. It was tied to the tree. It was a piece of white silk. This woman was seeking death. Chapter 126. He Yan had never thought that there would be such a difficult time in life. It was so difficult that she couldn't even take a step forward. She hadn't seen the moon in a long time. Since she lost her sight, she had been living in a daze. Su Zhiheng had comforted her, saying that he would always be by her side. He Yan had also smiled and agreed. However, no matter how calm she appeared, her heart was still at a loss and fearful. She had faced many difficulties in her life. Most of the time, she had stood up with a strong will and told herself that everything would be fine after she took this step. Unconsciously, when she looked back, she had already taken many steps. This was the only step she couldn't take, and she didn't know how to take it. He Yan was no longer General Fei Hong. She had become young Mistress Su, and she was just an ordinary woman. An ordinary woman suddenly lost her sight. Although her husband still treated her well, it was like a flower in the water, with a kind of illusory perfunctory. She couldn't feel it. On Chinese Valentine's Day, she sat in the Fu until late at night, but Su Zhiheng didn't return. She originally thought that it was because of some matters at court. She only found out the next day that Su Zhiheng had accompanied He Wanru to the temple fair. She groped her way to the window in the room and sat down, quietly listening to the servant girls outside chatting. Yesterday, Master and Madam quarreled. They quarreled so much that even Master knew. Master is in a bad mood, but we servants are unlucky. Isn't it all because of that person in the east courtyard? If you ask me, I think Master is too soft-hearted. That person in the east courtyard is now blind. How can our young mistress be blind? It'll be a joke. Madam even cancelled the banquet outside these days because she didn't want others to ask. A servant girl couldn't stand it and spoke up for her. Young mistress wasn't born blind. She's already very pitiful for suddenly becoming like this. Pitiful? What's so pitiful about her? Even if she's blind, she can stay in the Fu and be served every day. At least she doesn't lack food and clothing. What's the difference between her and that pet? The pitiful one is Master. At such a young age, he has to be tied up with this blind person for the rest of his life. Our Master is talented and unparalleled. What kind of woman can't he find? Why does he have to find someone like this? Yes. I'm the pitiful one. Words like these were like sharp hooks that drilled into her heart, making her bleed profusely. That night, she sat in her room and waited for Su Zhiheng to come back. She said to him, "Let's divorce." Su Zhiheng was startled and asked warmly, "Why do you say that?" "Or you can divorce me." She didn't like to beat around the bush, so she spoke the truth. "Now that I can't see, there's no need for me to burden you. You and I are husband and wife." Su Zhiheng held her hand and said, "Don't talk about this anymore. Rest early." He changed the subject, but did not deny He Yan's claim of being a burden. He Yan's heart sank. Every day after that, she lived a life of being provided with clothes and food, and often heard the servants in the residence secretly ridiculing her. Madame Su's words were full of sarcasm, implying that He Yan was a burden to the Su family. Su Zhiheng still treated her gently, but other than that, there was nothing else. He Yan felt very tired. She seemed to be walking on a dark road in the middle of the night, with no passers-by. She couldn't see the light in front of her, and there was no place to retreat behind her. She didn't know when she would reach the end and end this torturous life. A few days before the Mid-Autumn Festival, she said to Su Zhiheng, "I know Yuhua Temple on Mount Lianshan. There's an immortal tree in the temple that's very spiritual. During the Mid-Autumn Festival, can we go to the mountains? I want to hang silk on the tree and make a wish. Maybe my eyes can be cured." Since she lost her sight, she almost never asked for anything from Su Zhiheng. Su Zhiheng was stunned for a moment, but he finally agreed. He said, "Okay." Perhaps it was because when one was unlucky, even drinking cold water would get stuck in one's teeth. In previous years, the Mid-Autumn Festival was sunny, but this year, it rained for days. When the carriage reached the mountain, the sky was unbelievably gloomy. It was impossible to go down the mountain that afternoon. Perhaps they would have to stay on the mountain for one more night. Su Zhiheng helped her to the temple. A monk stuffed a piece of red silk into her hand and told her the location of the immortal tree behind the temple. He Yen stroked the red silk and thanked the monk. The monk clasped his hands and said kindly, "If you suffer 100,000 calamities, your work will not perish. When the time comes, karma will reap what you sow." She didn't understand Buddhist scriptures. She wanted to ask again, but the monk had already walked far away. It was raining. Su Zhiheng accompanied He Yen to the side of the immortal tree. There were stone tables and stone stools beside the immortal tree for the pilgrims who usually came to hang the red silk to write. Su Zhiheng laid out the red silk for her and stuffed a brush into her hand. He said, "Write." He Yen wrote slowly based on her feelings, "I hope I can still see the moon." He didn't need to think to know that the handwriting must be crooked and terrible. After she finished writing, she carefully handed the red silk to Su Zhiheng. Su Zhiheng helped her hang the immortal tree. He Yen couldn't see anything, so she didn't see it. Her husband stood up and casually hung the red silk on a branch by his elbow. He didn't even bother to tie the red silk properly and just hung it casually. There was no shelter on the tree. After a short while, the red silk was soaked by the rain. The handwriting on it quickly became a blurry ink stain. It was difficult to see what was written. "Let's go." Su Zhiheng came over and helped He Yen leave. Boom! A small clap of thunder resounded. Suddenly, a gust of cold wind blew, causing the tree branches to rustle. The red silk that was not tied properly was blown off by the wind. It smashed into the puddles of water, splashing mud all over. He Yen seemed to feel something and asked worriedly, "The wind is so strong. Won't it blow the silk away?" "How could it?" Su Zhiheng smiled and comforted her. "It's tied very tightly." After he said that, he stepped over the red silk as if he didn't see it. The rain showed no signs of stopping. They had no choice but to stay in the mountains for the night. Su Zhiheng went to find the masters of Yuhua Temple to discuss the sutras. It was already evening. He Yen sat quietly in the room with the lights on. At this time, she should have gone to bed and rested. As a blind person, there was nothing she could do except sleep and eat. But tonight, the rain was sparse and she couldn't sleep. She didn't know what time it was. She called the maids' names twice, but no one answered. She leaned against the wall and slowly walked out, intending to call someone. When she reached the door, she heard two maids talking. "I think I heard young mistress calling for someone." "Really? Don't worry about it. It's so late. What's the point of calling for someone? You're already a blind person, yet you're still making trouble. Do you really think you're young mistress?" He Yen was startled when she heard this. These two maids weren't her personal maids. They were Su Zhiheng's servants. Usually, they were gentle. Because of her relationship with Su Zhiheng, they had always treated her with respect. She didn't know that they were talking about her like this in private. "If she didn't want to go up the mountain today, we wouldn't have to spend the Mid-Autumn Festival here. It's still raining outside. It's really unlucky. Sir is just too kind. He's not angry even with such a burden. It's not like you don't know Sir's temperament. On the surface, he's not angry, but in his heart, he's always unhappy. Our Su family has become a joke in the capital. Sir has always been proud and arrogant. Thinking about it, his heart must be very uncomfortable. If I were her, I'd hang myself with a rope so that I won't be a burden to others." "Shoo! You can't say such nonsense." The maids who spoke disagreed. "You're like an animal. Every day, you wait for someone to feed you. After eating, you sleep. You're always being served. You can't leave the residence, and you can't see anyone. Life is boring. It's okay for 1 or 2 years, but if you have to live like this for the rest of your life, what's the point of living? It's better to die early and be free. Perhaps you'll be able to see the rest of your life if you're reincarnated. Stop talking. There's hot water outside. Let's go get some hot water first. The sound of footsteps gradually faded away. Hien slowly slid down to sit with her back to the door. Yes, 1 or 2 years was fine, but if she had to live like this for the rest of her life, what was the point of living? The maids in the master's room didn't dare to trample on whoever the master thought highly of. Since these two people could talk about her as if nothing had happened, it was clear that Su Zhiheng wasn't as free of regrets in the room as he was in front of her. However, in this world, how many people could be free of regrets? Hien didn't know if the lights in the room were on or not. To her, it was all the same. All of a sudden, he felt like he had lost all hope. When she was young, she practiced martial arts. When she was young, she went to school. Later on, she went to the battlefield and fought for military merits. She had been working for others for the rest of her life. With great difficulty, she finally took off her mask. She thought that she could start all over again, but at this time, she fell into darkness again. Moreover, she would be trapped in a four-corner house for the rest of her life. She had to be followed every step she took. A person's despair wasn't accumulated overnight. Little by little, the little things in daily life nibbled away at his passion. His passion was slowly being exhausted. Disappointment and heaviness weighed down on him, and the last straw fell gently. With a splash, hope sank to the bottom of the water. Despair covered the sky and covered the earth. She groped around and slowly stood up. There was a belt left over from her clothes in the room. She randomly grabbed her outer garment and put it on. She picked up the bamboo pole she used when she was blind and shakily went out the door. There were few people in the mountain temple. Because it was dark and raining outside, the monks had already entered the temple hall. She walked around randomly and unexpectedly didn't bump into anyone. Fortunately, when she was young, she had cultivated the habit of memorizing the road. She still remembered that when she went up the mountain, Su Zhiheng told her that there was a dense forest near the mountain stream not far from the temple. The waterfall was like pearls and jade falling on a plate. It was magnificent and strangely beautiful. There were mountains, water, and trees. It was pretty good. Unfortunately, it was raining tonight and there was no moon, which she liked. It was inconvenient for a blind person to go out, especially on a muddy mountain road. She didn't know how many times she fell and how many times she was tripped by Shirtu. She only felt that her clothes were wet from head to toe and her hair was messy. In the end, she was gasping for breath and didn't know where she was. She fell in front of a tree and hit her head on the trunk. Hien reached out and groped around. This tree was very big. It should be an old tree. She probably couldn't find a dense forest with a waterfall. Here was also fine. She had never cared much about external objects. It took her a long time to move to a piece of Shirtu. Hien was exhausted. He sat down on the Shirtu. The rain was a little lighter, and it hit her body densely. The young woman looked up at the sky, as if she could see the moon. Only the rain slid down her cheeks. She wiped the water off her face. Don't be a boat on the river. Don't be a moon on the river. The boat carries people and leaves. The moon shines on people and leaves. She didn't have anything to miss about this world. The only thing she missed was that there was no moon tonight. Hien slowly stood up and touched the cloth beside her. The cloth was tied tightly. She pulled it down. It was very stable. It shouldn't break. She kicked the Shirtu away. The cloth that was twisted into a rope broke with a sound. He Yen was caught off guard and fell to the ground. The mud on the ground splashed on her. She was stunned for a moment. Suddenly, she understood that the cloth was broken. It was broken. For a moment, she couldn't suppress the inexplicable grievance and sorrow in her heart. She choked for a moment, then sobbed softly. Then, she lay on the ground and cried loudly. He Yen rarely shed tears. As a general, shedding tears would affect morale. On the battlefield, she always had to maintain her confident and energetic appearance, as if nothing could affect her judgment. When she was no longer a general, she would feel that she was being unreasonable if she wanted to cry again. But there were always times when people were weak. When she was neglected, she could endure it. When she was blind, she could endure it. When she heard the taunts of the maidservants, she could endure it. When her mother-in-law hinted that she would be a burden, she could endure it. But if she couldn't even kill herself, and even the cloth was about to break, she couldn't endure it. Her tears were hot. Big drops of tears flowed down her cheeks and fell into the mud under her body. She couldn't tell which was the rain and which was the tears. She cried heartbreakingly. Suddenly, she heard a strange voice. It was a man's voice. In the wind and rain, his voice was deep and pleasant. With a hint of impatience, he asked, "Why are you crying?" He Yan's crying stopped abruptly. Xiao Ju looked at the woman in front of her. This was a woman who was seeking death. She was in a sorry state from head to toe. She was wearing a white inner robe, but she was wearing a red outer robe. Even the belt of the outer robe was tied incorrectly. Perhaps she had fallen many times on the road, but the robe had several holes. Her face was also extremely dirty. She looked like a cat with mud everywhere. Xiao Ju loved cleanliness. She felt that this scene was very offensive. Finally, she couldn't help but take out a white handkerchief and hand it over. The woman didn't take it. She made a defensive posture and asked, "Who are you?" He was surprised for a moment. He noticed that the other party's eyes were wandering. After thinking for a moment, he put away the handkerchief and squatted down to ask, "You can't see?" The woman was stunned for a moment. She replied fiercely, "Yes. I'm blind." She said it with arrogance. Fei Nu stood behind him and was about to step forward. Xiao Ju gently shook his head at him. He Yan clenched her fists vigilantly. She just wanted to quietly hang herself. Now, the cloth was broken and a stranger saw her embarrassing situation. Why did the heavens always treat her so unexpectedly? Xiao Ju looked at her indifferently and bent down to pick up the throwing knife on the ground. Just now, he had used this knife to break the cloth on the tree. "What do you want?" He Yan asked. Xiao Ju replied, "I'm just passing by." He really wasn't a good person who liked to meddle in other people's business. He had already done his best to go to this extent. Xiao Ju stood up and turned to leave. After a few steps, Fei Nu came closer and whispered, "Today, Yuhua Temple only has Hanlin scholar Su Zhiheng and his wife. This woman should be He Yan, young Mistress Su who was blind a few days ago." He Yan. He raised his eyebrows. He Rufei's younger sister. Xiao Ju turned around to look. The woman had already found the broken piece of cloth. The cloth was not long, but it could still be used after it was broken into two. First, she used half of the cloth to draw a few lines around her neck. After confirming that it could still be used, she shakily tied a knot with the cloth. She actually wanted to hang herself again. Xiao Ju was a little incredulous and wanted to laugh. This kind of stubbornness bordering on stupidity was very similar to her cousin. Most people seek death out of a moment of anger. They hang themselves and jump off a cliff. When the moment comes, most people will regret it, but it's too late. Since this woman had already tasted death, she wouldn't seek death again. He didn't expect her to be so stubborn. Even if the rope was broken, she still wanted to continue. He shouldn't have cared. No one could stop a person who was determined to die. But Xiao Ju suddenly remembered many years ago. On a mid-autumn night like this, a young man anxiously returned home, only to find his mother's cold corpse. The scene in front of him seemed to overlap with the past. For a moment, he couldn't tell which night it was. Fei Nu was behind him, looking at him in confusion. Xiao Ju took a deep breath and finally compromised. He walked to the woman's side and asked, "Why do you want to die?" He Yan was shocked. She clearly heard the other party's footsteps leaving. Why did she suddenly turn back? She had been forced to compromise her whole life and was manipulated by others. Now that she was at her end, she didn't want to think about others. This person's meddling in other people's business made her unhappy, so she vented all her anger on him. She almost shouted back, "It's none of your business." The young man grabbed her arm and pulled her up from the ground. He Yan was shocked. She struggled for a bit, but she was already stumbling and didn't have any strength left. She couldn't see, so she was dragged along. After taking 2 steps, she was thrown down and sat on the ground. The ground was soft. It was a patch of grass. That person seemed to be standing beside her. He bent over and said in a cold voice, "Why do you want to die?" He Yan was also angry. She shouted, "I said it's none of your business. There's no moon today, so I want to die. The mountain road is too slippery, so I want to die. Even the rope I tied will break, so I want to die. I met a meddlesome person like you here, so I want to die. Is that enough?" She shouted fiercely, but tears rolled down her cheeks. She was originally an aggressive tiger, but now she looked more like a wet wild cat with nowhere to go. Fei Nu stood nervously behind Xiao Ju. It was rare for second young master Xiao to be patient enough to meddle in other people's business. This woman was also so fierce. It was even rarer. After He Yan shouted, she suddenly felt something wipe her face. It was soft and dense like the clouds in spring. Indifferent, with a trace of imperceptible warmth, a comforting voice sounded. "If you really want to be strong, so what if you're blind? Even if you're blind, you can be the most different one among the blind." Her anger came to an abrupt end. All of his wretched and weak state had nowhere to hide, completely exposed in front of everyone. "It's nothing. Although I can't see, I can still hear. You're with me, so it's okay." She smiled and said to Su Jiheng, "How could it be okay? How could it be okay?" At night, she used her fingers to trace her eyes over and over again, praying for God's mercy so that she could see again the next day. Those nights where she tossed and turned, those nights where she gritted her teeth and told herself it was okay, those nights where she pretended as if nothing had happened, they didn't know. They didn't understand anything. But a stranger passing by understood. She couldn't cry, couldn't be seen as weak, couldn't complain, couldn't lose her temper. It had been too long, so long that these emotions were like silkworms spinning silk, wrapping her layer by layer into a strong cocoon. She sat alone in the cocoon, isolated from the outside world. He Yan outside the cocoon was gentle, optimistic, and always thinking of others with a smile. He Yan inside the cocoon was painful, wronged, and suppressed his cries for help. For so many years, from He Rufei to He Yan, she had never taken off her mask. Until tonight, a stranger passing by saw through everything. He took off her mask and saw her tears. All her defenses and vigilance were instantly deflated. She slowly lowered her head, and her tears fell even bigger. He originally thought that after saying this sentence, He Yan would stop crying, but he didn't expect her to cry even louder. The rain showed no signs of stopping, and the grass below was already wet. Xiao Ju hooked his finger, and Fei Nu stepped forward. He took the umbrella in Fei Nu's hand and held it over He Yan's head. He Yan still didn't stop crying. He had never seen such a fierce, bad-tempered woman who could cry so much. It was hard to imagine that He Rufei, who was so silly and happy, would have such a different sister. Xiao Ju was dumbfounded by her crying. He couldn't bear it anymore and finally said, "Don't cry." "Why can't I cry?" She was like an ignorant wild cat, showing her claws to the person who fed her. Her voice was already hoarse, but she still wanted to argue, "Not only will I cry, I will also seek death. I'm already like this, what's the point of living?" Sob 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 sob. Xiao Ju, he had never coaxed a woman before, and this was the result of his first attempt. Why was she so stubborn? "What do I have to do to make you stop crying?" He suppressed his anger, "So that you won't continue to hang yourself." He Yen sobbed and sobbed. Now that she was here, she no longer had any thoughts of seeking death. Sometimes, people were just stuck at a juncture. If it was over, it was over. If it couldn't be over, it couldn't be over. This passerby appeared out of nowhere, and his words were not very warm, but she didn't want to die. She said, "If you can give me a piece of candy now, I won't seek death." When she was young, she liked to eat sweet things. However, after she was 5 years old, Madam He kept a very strict watch on her. She was afraid that she would be exposed, so she had to get rid of her sweet habit. Later, she joined the army. There were no sweet candies in the army, only coarse dry biscuits. After she got married, He Yen saw that He Wanru was sick. Su Zhiheng went to visit her and specially brought her a small box of candied plums. When He Wanru took a sip of medicine, Su Zhiheng stuffed a piece of candied plum into her mouth. He Yen saw this when he passed by the window. For a moment, jealousy rose in his heart. He didn't know if he was envious that Su Zhiheng was so good to He Wanru, or that He Wanru could get a lot of sweetness after suffering a little. He Yen had never been willful, but tonight, he didn't know why, but he seemed to want to show his willfulness to the extreme in front of this stranger. The young man was slightly startled. He turned his head to look at the person beside him. The woman's face was carelessly wiped a few times with a handkerchief. Her cheeks were still muddy. Her eyes were slightly red and swollen, but they were surprisingly bright. Her stubborn expression was familiar. It was very similar to a clumsy teenager. He was silent for a moment. His slender fingertips reached for the sachet at his waist. Fei Nu was shocked. He held the dark blue sachet in his hand. He pinched the bottom of the sachet and poured out a piece of osmanthus candy wrapped in candy paper. It had been too long. The candy paper and the candy had been stuck together. It was so dark that it was impossible to see its original appearance. After Madame Xiao died, Xiao Ju carried the last piece of osmanthus candy with him. Over the years, this candy had accompanied him through many difficult times. When he couldn't hold on anymore, he looked at this candy. It seemed that he could taste a little sweetness in the world. This was the only sweetness in his life. Now, he was going to give it to a woman who couldn't stop crying and wanted to die. He thought that he didn't need candy in his life. So be it. He Yen felt something stuffed into her hand. She subconsciously clenched it and wanted to peel it off. "You can't eat it." A man's voice sounded beside her. "What?" She said, "Are you lying to me? You randomly found a piece of Shi Tu and told me that it's candy." He Yen heard the other person's voice. There was a hint of disappointment in his voice. "This is the last piece of candy left in the world. It's very sweet, but you can't eat it. Are you crazy?" He Yen never knew that she was such a greedy person. She thought that this person must have a good temper and a soft heart to tolerate her nonsense again and again. She said, "It's very sweet, but you can't eat it. There's only one in the world. Is this a gift from His Majesty?" She didn't see that the handsome young man sitting beside her lowered his head and smiled indifferently. He said, "It's more precious than a gift from His Majesty." He Yen quickly tore off the candy paper and stuffed it into her mouth when the other person wasn't paying attention. "You." He was stunned. "I've already eaten it. I swallowed it." He Yen acted shamelessly. The other person didn't answer. This was the first piece of candy she had received in her life. The taste of the candy was very strange. It was mixed with her tears. It was so bitter. She thought, so be it. Has the rain stopped? She didn't feel the rain falling on her body. She reached out and scratched her body as she asked the person beside her. The young man beside her had been kneeling on one knee, holding an umbrella for her. The umbrella was not big. More than half of his body was wet. The side of his face was well defined, and his eyelashes were covered with fine droplets of water. His eyes were enshrouded with a faint layer of gentleness. It stopped. Is there a moon in the sky? The sky was dark, and there was not a single star. Where did the moon come from? He answered, yes. What, is it like outside? The bright moon is like frost, the wind is like water, and the scenery is endless. Yen smiled for the first time that night. It's so nice. She heard the person beside her ask, don't you want to die? I don't want to. If you don't want to die, then go home. He said and pulled Yen up. Yen subconsciously wanted to grab his hand, but that slender hand with distinct joints had already let go very quickly. Xiaoju walked in front of Fei Nu and whispered, send him to sister-in-law's room and let her send him back. I'm a man, so it's inconvenient for me to appear. Fei Nu complied. When he was about to leave, he suddenly added, warn Su Zhiheng, tell him not to go too far. This meant that he was going to stand up for Yen. Fei Nu came over to support Yen. Yen seemed to feel that the other person was about to leave. She reached out in the person's direction and said, thank you. Who are you? He didn't speak. Yen only had time to grab the corner of a sleeve. It slipped from her hand. It was cold and soft, like the moonlight. Even though she couldn't see anything, she vaguely saw light. It was warm and cold, blazing and bright. It didn't blame her at all. It was patient and tolerant. It saw through all her secrets and wrapped her up gently. In the end, she didn't know who the other person was. That was the worst mid-autumn festival that Yen had ever experienced. She was covered in mud, her hair was unkempt, and her face was dirty. She was only a hair's breadth away from despair. Fortunately, the moon was always by her side. There was no moon that night, but the moonlight was really beautiful. The thin and soft light had warmed her for many years. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.